Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the RTA's meeting of the Board of Directors. I want to review a few guidelines for our meeting this morning. For the members who are here in person, as most of you are all the time, thank you. Please turn your microphones on when you wish to speak and off when you are done so that we limit the background noise and make sure only one person is speaking at a time. I will call on those with questions or comments for those who are here in person. If you're calling in remotely, and there may only be one director that is doing that today, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize the background noise because we do record these meetings. When you have a question or comment, if you're remote, please raise your virtual hand and the board secretary will call on you one at a time. When she calls on you, please remember, as I sometimes don't, to lower your virtual hand. With that said, I will now officially call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Northeastern Illinois Regional Transportation Authority to order. And will everyone in attendance please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're so patriotic. We have two flags in here today. Madam Secretary, let's start off by calling the roll.
Good morning, everyone. Director Carey?
Here.
Director Colson?
Here.
Director Gathing?
Here.
Director Gorman?
Here.
Director Groven?
Here.
Director Jenkins? She was on. Director Katarik?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Madero?
Here.
Director Pang?
Here.
Director Rotondo?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Ryan?
Here.
Director Sager? Here. Director Yonan?
Here.
And Chairman Dillard.
Present.
We have 15 present.
Great, thank you. We have a big, more than quorum attendance today. Good morning, Sarah, virtually. Now that we've established we have a physical quorum and the board secretary has received the completed notice from directors Jenkins and Pang indicating that they cannot attend in person pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, they are deemed admitted unless there's any objection from members of the board. Seeing none, the directors may participate remotely, Madam Secretary. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting and executive session held on February 20th, 2025. You've all had these before you for a week or so. Any corrections or comments? If not, how about a motion and a second to we approve? Dr. Sager moves that we approve the minutes from the February 2025 meeting, seconded by Director Rotondo. And with that, Joey, please take a roll call.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Gorman?
Aye.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins? He is online. Director.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Katarik?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Mondero?
Yes.
Dr. Pang?
Yes.
Dr. Rotondo?
Yes.
Dr. Ross?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Dr. Sager?
Yes.
Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
We have 16 ayes.
And please, good morning, Natasha. Good morning, Director Jenkins. Please, Madam Secretary, add Director Jenkins to the roll.
Good morning, thank you.
Yep. So the board minutes are approved from February 20th. Item 4 is the public comment segment of the meeting. Any comments received now will be read into the record by the board secretary. I believe she may have one written comment. Is that correct? And why don't you read that one into the record, and then we'll take the folks who want to speak who are present in the room.
This comment is from Meg Matthias, RTA team. I'm writing to express my deep support and commitment to the continued financial support of CTA, Metro, and PACE service in Chicago. I and every Chicago professional I know rely on the CTA and Metro to commute across the city several times every day. Cuts to service, including bus lines, would be detrimental to our city and the lives of our citizens. The idea of 1 in 5 Chicagoans lacking transit and 500,000 citizens losing their main source of transportation is devastating. The city needs more transit options and increased service, not less. I encourage the Chicago City Council and Illinois Legislature to make any possible concessions in order to continue the current operations of Chicago Transit and in fact increase service wherever possible. With concern, Meg Matias, 32 Ward, Chicago.
Thank you. Amen. Um, uh, Is there anyone here who wishes to speak today? Joy, I don't know if you have a list, but come on up. Introduce yourself and where do you reside as well? Where do you live? Where are you from? Good morning, and thank you very much for being here today.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Stephen Hyatt Leonard. I reside in Evanston, and I use mainly PACE paratransit services to get from point A to point B on a regular basis. And not funding PACE or the CTA or Metro would be a detrimental issue to not only my quality of life, but the others in my community who rely on PACE to be able to get places right on a regular basis, I should say. So please try to make an effort to find the funding so services are not cut as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And obviously, I think every member of our board realizes that ADA paratransit is maybe the most important thing we do. It's not only a transportation issue, it's a civil rights issue. One of the things I would say, and we are fighting this in talking to the legislators all the time, is while we have about $250 million of expenses for ADA paratransit, it's a mandate. The state of Illinois only reimburses us about 4% of that $250 million. So it is a massive, massive unfunded mandate from the state of Illinois. And you can rest assured that, Stephen, that we're going to do everything possible to make sure that ADA paratransit is available for you, including trying to get you the latest equipment. I see Melinda Metzger, the executive director of PACE here, the latest equipment for you to ride on as well. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here and helping us stress our case to the legislature and local leaders. Doug Fowler next?
Yes, Doug is on the Zoom.
Oh, okay, great. Douglas, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. As I said, I'm Doug Fowler. I'm a Will County writer in Joliet and a member of the RTA Citizens Advisory Board. Will County is the fastest growing collar county. Joliet especially seeing significant growth. Joliet in general has a diverse economy, a diverse workforce, with many relying on PACE buses around the warehouses, but also that work, within Chicago and rely heavily on the Rock Island and the Heritage Corridor Metro trains to commute. For many, being able to reach their jobs with PACE or Metro is the only thing keeping them from living their lives, only thing keeping them living their lives as they wish. Many people don't have other transit options. If someone was working in Joliet, working in Chicago, but lives in Joliet and suddenly no longer has a feasible way to get there, they may find themselves unable to live in their communities, which for many people has been their homes their entire life. And this is especially true for people in my community, which is 50 miles outside of Chicago. Due to the distance, the cost of a daily commute by car could be astronomical in fuel costs alone. Even though I live and work in the Joliet area, being able to have convenient metro access was one of the largest selling points for why I chose to move to Joliet and start my family here. Being able to take my daughter into the city on a metro train, which I've done nearly every Sunday for the past several years, is something that I'm so grateful for as a father. The transit services in our community are the circulatory system of the entire Chicagoland area. If they no longer existed as they do, many people would choose not to rely on cars. Many people who choose not to rely on cars would have no choice but to add that expense upon themselves. The cost of fuel, car payments, car insurance, and repairs could easily add another $1,000 in expenses upon citizens and make the roads even more congested and unsafe for drivers with more cars. This would also increase the wear and tear on our already damaged infrastructure. I speak for myself, but I know I echo the concerns of many within my community when I say that we should not be cutting services, but expanding and investing within our transit system. CTA, Metra, and PACE are one of the strongest assets and one of the greatest edges this region has at attracting people, businesses, and opportunity. I hope that our representatives in Springfield see the same opportunities in our system that I do. And I implore all stakeholders to do all that they can to keep us from going off the fiscal cliff and truly make a generational investment in all our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. And I think obviously every member of this board agrees with you, especially your own representative from Will County who does a magnificent job. J.D. Ross is the former president of the Joliet Community College, but your points are so well taken and we'll use you in a commercial for us. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for dialing in this morning. Really appreciate it. All right, there's no other further public comment that I see. Let's move on to item 5, which is the Executive Director's Report of Leanne Redden. Leanne, good morning.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you. I will be brief, but welcoming our guests into the meeting today, as well as the leadership from CTA, Metro, and PACE, who will be available and up here in a few moments. So I just have a brief report before we jump into our presentations. Last weekend, I attended the APTA CEO conference, and that meeting was primarily focused on conversations around navigating federal changes while we continue to advocate for additional funding, competitive grants, as well as talking about the similar issues that we are facing across the country, not just myself, but my peers. It's always an important 2 days for me to go to that meeting, and actually I had to skip it last year, unfortunately. But it's as important to be able to connect with my fellow peers around the country so we can sort of share notes, stories, a little camaraderie, and a little bit of moral support sometimes as we sort of navigate these difficult situations that we're all facing right now. Just a few reminders before discussing our legislative update. The community planning call for projects is now open through April 4. The 5310 call for projects is also open through April 24. You can find information, both applications as well as other details on the RTA website at rtachicago.org. And as always, we encourage you to share that information, or at least talk these items up amongst your networks and the communities that you represent. And finally, I want to remind you that we are planning to hold our Transforming Transit Summit on Tuesday, April 15. All the service boards, as well as leaders from WMATA, Washington, D.C.'s transit system, and MTC in the Bay Area will be joining us to participate in this half-day program that we're putting together that is going to be focused on how we will implement the vision that we've laid out in our Transforming Transit work, through both addressing the fiscal cliff as well as applying new funding to increase the frequency and service and better integration of services across our region. So I really encourage you to sign up and join us, bringing in some experts who have gone through some of this kind of work a little bit ahead of us and are grappling with some of these same situations too. It's good to hear from others, not just sort of inside our own region and our own voices. So that should be a great afternoon. So next slide, please. As usual, you're going to hear from Rob on our legislative update, focused mostly on our state and local issues. So I'll just keep my report focused on the federal items right now. Earlier this month, I think you probably recall, Congress passed and the president signed the continuing resolution that'll fund the government through September 30, so getting us through this federal fiscal year. The CR funds programs at basically the same levels as for fiscal year 2024, including programs from the THUD Appropriations Act and advanced appropriations for the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, IIJA as we call it, including the advanced appropriations. The CR provides $20.9 billion for public transportation overall, and that's an increase of just around 1%. The total funding that is being appropriated represents about 95% of the authorized amount in the IIJA. So there was a lot of uncertainty where they were going to cut back, and so I think that that's actually a fairly positive outcome with that CR passing. On Tuesday, March 11, the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy issued a directive to transportation agencies to undergo a project, and the federal transportation agencies, not us directly at this point, to undergo project-by-project review of federal grant recipients, including projects with partially obligated funds. USDOT is reviewing projects to ensure compliance with recent Trump administration executive orders. And under that directive, USDOT instructed agencies to identify projects that include equity, climate change, environmental justice, gender-specific, bicycle infrastructure, and electric vehicle components. So the grant awards with fully obligated agreements are not subject to this review. Recipients of partially obligated awards will have the opportunity to revise project scopes and to eliminate flagged activities and include Trump administration priorities as well. Several executive orders cited by USDOT for authority on this review face many legal challenges that are ongoing at this point. And they may affect this new directive. So we're sort of standing by and watching. RTA staff are reviewing projects that sort of with the service boards, which may be affected by some of these potential changes. I will say in my conversations, I had the benefit of spending some time with the most senior FTA staffer there, the executive director of the FTA. And last week, FTA actually did release some grants, new grants for low and no emission vehicles. So while our region wasn't in that very immediate pipeline, I think it was slightly encouraging to see that they are still, they did the review, and then they said that these projects can, these grants can proceed. So we're sort of cautiously optimistic and somewhat encouraged by some of these small signs, at least coming out of DOT and their continued commitment to transportation and infrastructure. And just to wrap up, after my report today, you'll hear as I noted, the legislative update as well as financial updates as part of our Transit is the Answer implementation report. Following that, we'll have a presentation responding to the resolution that you passed back in January, directing next steps to address the fiscal cliff. We'll then ask for your action on several ordinances, the first being capital funding and approval of the federal allocations agreements of the federal, what's the word I'm looking for? Federal formula funds, sorry, losing my train of thought there. The federal formula funds to Northeastern Illinois. So I think as you recall, those monies we have to allocate to Northeastern Wisconsin and to Indiana, and then split the rest up amongst the three operators. There'll be some amendments to the ICE program for CTA and Metra as well. The contract for federal legislative consulting services is for your consideration, and the next contract for signage maintenance, transit signage maintenance, is on the agenda as well. Then a contract amending the audio-visual equipment and services to support basically us streaming these meetings. And then finally, we'll ask for some approval on some of the chairman's expenses. With that, Mr. Chairman, I am happy to answer any questions, but can turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for our executive director these days? If not, let's move on to item 6A, which is a Transit is the Answer update from our government affairs director, Rob Nash, and other staff and whoever else is coming up. Doug.
Rob will come.
We're missing Rob.
He's here,
He's on the phone.
probably.
It's all right.
You want to start?
I could.
You can start.
You could start without him.
Yeah.
Forward to line.
Thanks.
Slide 13.
Well, hang on.
I'm sorry, forward to slide 13.
Yeah.
Let's cover
can-
finance first.
We can flip it.
Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Doug Anderson, Manager of Budgets Analysis here at the RTA. This will be a brief presentation on the Service Board results for January 2025. We have a saying in finance group here that 1 month does not a trend make. But having said that, it's always interesting to get our first look at actual results for the new budget year. Next slide, please. The results for January look fairly similar to where the 2024 budget year ended up. Favorable to budget operating deficits for CTA, Metra, and Pace Suburban Service, and an unfavorable result for ADA Paratransit. Of particular note is that Pace's favorability has started the year down from the 20% plus range where it spent most of last year, and that's good to see. ADA Paratransit ridership was about 100,000 rides above budget for January, in turn increasing purchase transportation expense and producing a result which was more than $1 million unfavorable. This suggests that another funding shortfall for ADA Paratransit could develop as 2025 progresses. In the past, we have stated that lower than budgeted employee headcount was the primary driver of the favorable results we've been seeing, as the service boards dealt with the labor disruption brought on by COVID. On the next slide, we'll show how that situation has improved thanks to the service board's recruiting and retention efforts. Next slide. In response to a board request, we've added this new slide to provide a periodic update on the staffing situation at the service boards. Keeping in mind that each of the service boards budget a bit differently, here we show the actual January employee headcounts at the service boards relative to budget. A combined total of a little over 17,000 full-time equivalents. Shortfalls range from about 6% at Metra to about 18% at Pace. The CTA shortfall looks like 1,000 positions, but that requires some explanation since CTA applies a labor expense credit within their budget, which accounts for an assumed vacancy rate. As a result, CTA's actual headcount is closer to budgeted staffing expectation than one would surmise by simply looking at this chart, and there's a footnote on the slide to that effect. This is why CTA's operating deficit variance on the previous slide was among the lowest, and it's why CTA is able to add bus and rail service this spring. In general, all three service boards have made great strides in getting more fully staffed. Pace's shortfall is by no means due to lack of effort. As the Pace analyst, I attend all of the Pace board meetings and can assure you that they have many ongoing initiatives to recruit and retain employees, including innovative partnerships with local community colleges. In conclusion, variances in employee headcount should continue to generally track with the financial results variances shown on the previous slide. And I'll turn it over to Rob for the legislative update.
Thank you. Sorry for the improv there. Good morning, I'm Rob Nash, Director of Government Affairs, and I'll be providing you with an update on where we are in the legislative session and a look ahead toward the end of that session, a critical period as we are working to secure additional funding ahead of the fiscal cliff. Next slide, please. Last week was the deadline for bills to advance past their committee assignments or to receive an extension in the General Assembly. A few proposals that we've been watching outside of the larger issue have advanced past this stage, including a proposal to expand transit benefits, the transit benefit program to part-time workers, and various other proposals. Discussions on transit reform, governance structure, and funding continue. Both the Senate and House have held committee hearings on the MMA Act and the Labor Coalition's proposal on funding, or excuse me, on reform for the system. We expect additional hearings and discussions, including next week when the Senate Transportation Committee will hold a hearing focusing on budgets and operations at the service boards. We have briefed policy and budget staff on the current structure of collecting and distributing revenue and other aspects of the system, and we'll continue those conversations with staff through the end of session. Chairman Dillard, Leanne, and I have also outlined our approach on reforms with lawmakers, and we expect those conversations to continue as well, especially as we believe interested parties will begin to offer amendments on a comprehensive proposal in the coming weeks. While I think there's been some important progress made, we still expect this conversation to continue through the end of session, which is scheduled for May 31st. I know we have a lot of conversation with the service boards pending the impacts of the proposed cuts and enhancements to the system have been distributed to lawmakers and a whole host of stakeholders across the region. And we continue to sort of field questions and responses on that. I don't want to steal any of the thunder from the service boards, but I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Any questions, comments, direction? Dr. Sager.
I really don't have any questions, but I do want to extend my sincere gratitude to Rob, and I know that Melinda's here, Melinda with Pace, and others, Kendra, certainly Leanne, who have made that Lewis and Clark expedition trip out to McHenry County. I know that it's a tough one, but really, really grateful for the presence and the outreach. And I say that more in a generic sense for the entire region. I think you've done a remarkable job during this challenging period to get out and talk to people, answer questions, address concerns. And so I just want to say thank you and commend you all for that effort.
Dr. Sager, I just want you to know I began my morning talking to your former state senator Pamela Altoff from out there. So I got the McHenry County report already this morning. You guys do a very nice job of advocating, Doctor.
Thank you.
Director Montero.
Thank you, Chairman Dillard. Hi, Rob, and again, great job in terms of your advocacy on behalf of public transit. I've spoken briefly with the chairman. I think that it's important, if possible, for our board in its entirety, or as many of us as possible, to go with you to Springfield at some point to advocate to the legislative body. So if you can provide us, like, what would be the optimal date and time that might be, and then so that way we can arrange, like, for as many of the RTA board members to go together. I think that would send a very powerful message to the full legislature. But again, thank you so much for all that you're doing.
We can certainly keep you apprised of the schedule. I do think, obviously, kind of fluid down there in terms of how they manage the sequencing of some of these conversations, but I think we'll have a little bit more insight on that following the hearings this week. And we can certainly, there are some opportunities upcoming with some of our colleagues from downstate transit systems that will be in Springfield a little bit later in April too. So we'll follow up on that front.
Rob, I told Dennis, I think it's a great idea for those board members who can take a day to go to Springfield. My guess is we could probably get, a big conference room like we've done with the chairman of the boards and others that are interested, and then give them a list of whom in the legislature they should go call on from their local region as well, but have a conference room where legislators can come in and we could have coffee in the morning and they could meet the actual members of the RTA. So I thought that was a great idea sometime in May.
Will do.
To do it and just kind of pick a day when we can set that up. But I think that's a great idea, Director. Thank you. Director Ryan.
Just out of curiosity, what's the status on RTA having its own bill or running a bill?
So we're working with council on developing legislative language that reflects the reforms that we've articulated in various venues. We've gotten an initial draft of that back, and we're looking to refine it. The conversations, I think, on sort of specific tweaks to either proposal, I think have yet to begin in earnest, but I do believe they're imminent. This week, the House had a sort of similar hearing on the MMA proposal and the Labor Coalition's proposal on the heels of a Senate conversation the previous week. And I do think that was sort of necessary to sort of clear the underbrush for some of the conversations that we're going to have on where we're going next. And so we'll be ready to offer that language as we have those conversations.
So is your language just in response to the other bills that are out there, or is yours a whole new bill that's coming in?
It's not in response. So we've articulated how we think the three reforms that reform areas that we've talked about: fair policy, service planning, and capital project prioritization, how that would be implemented. And then I think the other main component of our approach here is because there has been confusion about the sort of the tension between expectation on authority that the agency has versus its ability to implement some of those authorities. We have tried to sort of address that and clear that up. But we think this should be an area that everyone agrees with. Whether some parties may contend that there's certain authorities in the statute, others I think have demonstrated there's a practical limitation on how to implement some of those things. I think that's kind of a moot point on both sides. Let's just write it out clearly and put it in the legislation, and then we don't have to have the debate anymore. And so that is probably the other component of the legislation that's a little bit, or our approach that's a little bit outside of the reform discussion. So, generally, we are looking to reflect the conversations we've had about transforming transit in legislation, but I wouldn't call it a standalone measure.
And Director Ryan and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume we talk to the legislative leaders and sort of get their direction on, number one, which bill they're probably going to work off of, and be prepared for us to work off of that with our own suggestions of amendments.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, as they say in Springfield, and I don't know if this is a good thing, there are rules and then there are rules, right? So the deadlines for some of these committee, for bills to be approved or move forward through committee have passed. The Senate has extended some of the deadlines on some of the pertinent legislation, but this is the type of issue that, we'll find a vehicle when and if it's necessary. So we expect that leadership will have sort of a shell bill available for all of these proposed changes.
And it's something this major, it's not uncharacteristic for the legislature to extend the deadline on particular bills, whether it's the labor bill or whatever bill, they just extend the deadline out. They'll just do a roll call or resolution on the floor and extend it out. So, they know we're on their agenda. Let's put it that way. Whether they want us to go away or not, we don't have a choice. Yes, Director Quintero.
Just a quick question, Rob. You mentioned some of the complexity in the law and making sure that we draft things very clearly. Are we drafting that legislation in-house or using outside consultants? And if it's the latter, do you need support to procure that?
We are working with outside counsel. I don't think it's a secret. Eric Madeir, who used to be the Senate Democrats' general counsel, has been participating in drafting, but a lot of it is produced in-house and sort of working with Eric on the formatting of that. He's been very, very helpful in clarifying that approach.
Yeah, Eric's one of the best that there has ever been, and he's worked with us, Tom, before on other issues.
Yeah.
So
I should mention that we've had a working relationship with him on a number of other fronts, and so he has familiarity not only with our act, which everyone focuses on, but the other acts that govern the service boards as well.
And he's universally respected by basically everyone, both parties, both chambers. He's a really known commodity, and I kidded Rob, it's better that he's working for us than somebody else. So, any other questions or comments here? Dr. Sager.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Rob, can you give us a sense of where you think this road usage question might be currently and where it might be heading? That's a $6,400 question.
I'll offer observations, limited observations. Since it's a proposal that's included in the labor bill, a road usage charge. Is the legislation suggests a pilot program to try and determine and gain some data, frankly, so they can make some better decisions on how how the state might be able to generate revenue outside of the gas tax. So as we shift to electric vehicles, how do we capture the use of the roadway as opposed to just the type of fuel going in the vehicle, right? So the legislation proposed a pilot program where 1,000 vehicles would sort of participate to generate, I think, some information and some data so that they can make additional decisions. But it really is sort of separate and outside of the transit issue specifically, and something that labor chose to include in their legislation. There have been, frankly, in a somewhat frustrating approach, there's been more discussion on the road usage charge than how to fund the transit system in Springfield, which we would hope to sort of flip that script. But I do think it's something that the state has an interest in understanding better. But we kind of defer to the proponents of that proposal. We haven't weighed in on it.
Anyone else? We'll move on. Thank you very much,
Thank
Doug
you.
and Rob. All right, item 6B is an update on the RTA Board Resolution 2025-01, directing next steps to address the fiscal cliff. And Leanne, you can start the presentation and introduce our wonderful service board guest if you'd like.
Yeah, and I'll invite them to come up now, so we're all kind of situated. And then you guys can you fit down the end? Thank you. Appreciate that. So good morning again. As you can see, we have leadership and staff from each of the service boards that are here today. But I do want to acknowledge that the hard work, not just our staff, but the service board staff have put into bringing this report to you today in terms of review, analysis, compiling information to respond to that the resolution that you passed in January. And as I noted, that our leadership from our three operators are here to support that conversation today and answer any specific questions you might have. So just to reorient everybody, the resolution requested information in 3 areas. The first one was a unified and regional summary of the consequences of the fiscal cliff. And then there's the second part would be a coordinated vision for investing the 1.5 billion in new state operations funding across our transit system. And then the final piece was a list of efficiencies that could be implemented soon and from even further proposed governance reform. So that's the highlights of the key elements of the resolution. So today's presentation, we're going to start with a little bit of background on the fiscal cliff, the state's role in supporting transit's operations, and some of the efficiencies and work that us and the 3 service boards have done for the past 10 years. Next, then, we'll review the timeline for implementing the required service cuts if there is no funding secured this session. Then I'm going to ask RTA's CFO, Kevin Bueso, to review the system-wide efficiencies, and then we'll hear about the service and other impacts of the fiscal cliff and expansion scenarios. Maulik Vaishnav, our RTA's Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming, will conclude by detailing both the consequences of inaction and the benefits of expansion if the legislators enable that 1.5 billion in new operating funding. So next slide, please. So as all of you know, but I think it's very important that we remind people that the system is facing a projected operating budget gap of $771 million annually and growing, starting in 2026, and will continue to grow thereafter due to chronic underfunding and changes in the travel patterns of our region after the pandemic. This is about this represents about 20% of the operating budget, and is consistent with fiscal cliffs that our peer systems are facing across the country, because they are facing the same regional dynamics and funding dynamics. Closing a gap of this magnitude is not possible by making small adjustments to service or raising fares. Cutting service by up to 40% across the region could be necessary to balance our budgets in future years. A cut of this scale would be devastating for riders, and it would immediately have very dramatic impacts on congestion, the entire regional economy, and we'll detail that as part of the presentation as well. So next slide. So just some context of sort of how we got to today. We talk a lot about sort of the chronic underfunding of the transit system for decades, but we wanted to just put a bit more of that, some context around some of that, those statements that we make. High levels of inflation over the last few years have increased the cost to the operations of transit services. It's just as it's driven up costs in every other sector of our economy, so we're not alone facing this situation. The dominant expense category in our operating budget is labor, specifically frontline transit workers who operate and maintain our buses, trains, and paratransit vehicles. As you see here, our operating budget has risen with inflation post-pandemic. just as each of the operating agencies have hired additional operators to expand service and keep up with the growing demand. But as this chart shows you, our expenses are still below the inflation rate, tracking below the consumer price index. So even in a time of unprecedented inflation, I think it's important to remind ourselves that the transit system in our region has remained highly efficient. Next slide. That high level of efficiency that we see across our system has been necessary for many years because of our operations funding has not kept up with rising costs. And in fact, the state support for transit operations has been cut over the last 10 years by more than $400 million. These policies began in the Rauner administration, and some continue to this day. So during these years, the service boards and the RTA have continued to balance budgets, their operating budgets, with efficiencies and fare increases. And I think it's important that we don't necessarily talk about on an annual basis that these efficiencies are an ongoing thing that we do and deliver to you in your balanced budgets, as well as, you know, in support of maintaining the transit system that we have and providing as much service as we can across the region. So next slide. This persistent underfunding has contributed to the fiscal cliff we're now facing. The cliff is not a one-time event. If a funding solution is not found this year, it will set up the system on a course for declining revenue, declining service, declining ridership year after year. And this is how systems collapse as their utility declines and people find other transportation options. And this is the future we are all working really hard to avoid. Next slide. If legislators don't help us identify a funding solution by the end of this May legislative session, staff across the system will need to immediately start planning for cuts. All plans for service, innovation, and expansion, such as CTA's frequent bus network, Metra's transition to regional rail, and PACE's revision expansion will be put on pause. In June, the RTA will inform service boards of available public funding for 2026 that could include no additional funding from Springfield. So the service boards would need to develop budgets with service cuts and fare increases in their proposals in accordance with the federal requirements of Title VI, and that includes some pretty significant planning and review analysis. It'll also require public engagement and a series of public hearings. In November and December, we would go through our annual budget process to finalize all those plans, and the service cuts would begin in early 2026. This timeline dictates our ask for addressing funding issues in this current legislative session in Springfield. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Kevin, who can talk about some of the additional proposed efficiencies that we could begin to execute.
Thank you, Leanne, and good morning to the Chairman Diller and to the board's members here. I'm Kevin Bueso. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the RTA. I'm going to cover the efficiencies, talk about some of the savings and the new revenues that the service boards and the RTA have worked together. We've met a few times over the last 2 months to formalize this process. So if we can go to the next slide, please. As Leanne talked about, our system is already one of the most efficient in the nation, consistently ranking near the top or at the top of the list in key metrics, and one of them is operating costs per passenger mile. Over the last few months, we have also met with representatives from other transit systems throughout the nation, including WMATA, and so with them, we have had discussions about what their planning is when it comes to listing or finding efficiencies. And so we have had really good discussions about that. And one of the consistent comments that we get is their leadership continues to say, you know, or using Chicago as an example, and how can they be as efficient as Chicago, and so we have continued to that extent in that discussion. Our process right now hasn't necessarily formalized the efficiency. As Leanne mentioned, we deliver to you every year and year after year through the budget process. This time around, we are going to formalize this process and brag a little bit more about it, to be honest, just because we need to be more, we need to focus more on listing those efficiencies through this budget process. So we're going to do that. In CMAP's plan of action for regional transit, which was developed in 2023, at the request of the legislature, their experts make the point that our system is already more cost efficient than most of our peers. And one of the comments that was included in there was to the detriment of our own success, right? Because then we're using cars and we're using equipment that is older than many of us here, and we continue to do that. And so this is also not to say we shouldn't continue to look into these every year. And so we're going to identify opportunities to minimize cost growth. Report highlights that elected officials and riders are consistently pushing for more services, which again requires more funding. Next slide, please. We also need to consistently highlight that the state support for transit operations in Metro Chicago significantly trails peer regions. So we have some examples here. In New York, that share is 28% compared to our 17%. In Boston is 44%, and in Philadelphia is 50%. Again, this lack of state support has constrained the resources available to improve, expand services for many, many years or decades. Next slide, please. A key component of the state's lack of funding, as Chairman Diller mentioned, has been their limited support for mandated programs like ADA paratransit service and free and reduced fare programs for seniors and people with disabilities. The state's reimbursement for ADA paratransit service this year is $10 million. Again, repeating, covers only 4% of the total cost of the program. The reimbursement for free and reduced fares is $20.9 million, covering only 14% of the total cost. As Leanne referenced earlier, both of these appropriations have declined over time, and this is not even accounting for the inflationary impact, which again in 2008, it reached a high point, although in recent years the state has instituted the small increases, but it hasn't been close to even hitting the inflationary factors that come in with providing the services. This limited reimbursement forces agencies to use the general operating revenue to cover all of these costs that are, again, mandatory. As you can imagine, this shrinks the pool of funds that can be used for expanding services, adding more frequent and accessible bus and train services across the region, as legislators and riders are consistently calling for as we have these public hearings or we have the conversations with the riders. Next slide, please. So getting more into the detail in response to the resolution, the potential efficiencies and new system generated revenue that could be achieved. You see, we have identified over $113 million in annual savings, and this new revenue, the largest portion of these is outlined here. It's a $50 million that would come from a 10% system-wide fare increase, which would bring us in line more with all the peer agencies across the nation. The negative impact, as you would expect, of fare increases on people experiencing low income can be mitigated if the state provides funding for permanent expansion of the access program across the system. The remainder of the items shown on this slide are expense savings, which have been identified by the service boards, with the largest efficiencies focused in the areas of service delivery, labor, and real estate, as they are outlined on this table. As an example, an identified service delivery change is to better match train length to customer demand and unidentified real estate is to acquire property rather than continuing to rent it or lease it. Again, some of these would require some changes on how we operate, but those are there. When we combine with the new revenue of fare increases, these identified savings and efficiencies come up to 113.2 million. Again, the resolution called for 100 million. We know that we can continue to work on these and we can again formalize these through the budget process, and we are committed to doing that starting with 2025. I'm sorry, 2026 budget. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Additional efficiencies and improvements could be achieved if the RTA is empowered with additional authority, and we have outlined what that authority would be over fares, service quality, and capital investment. As we have discussed with you over the last few months and as proposed in our Transform Transit plan. An enhanced RTA would play a key role in savings costs while efficiently improving and integrating customer experience through coordinating improvements and including, before I go into the details here, again, our focus continues to be on an enhanced experience for the rider, and we believe we can deliver on that. Some of those include administrative and operational improvements, facility consolidation, such as combining facilities and administrative offices. Joint IT licensing is another example in terms of IT cost savings. Regional consolidation of customer service to discuss fares and other issues that riders may have, questions that they may have. And also, as we mentioned, an integrated fare policy and administration of special fare programs. That's something that we could definitely improve on. We will continue to work with the service boards to implement efficiencies. We have representatives with me today, and again, I will pause here if in case there's any questions about these two slides, which again are the meat of the resolution. And at this time, again, open up for questions before passing it on to our next presenter.
Questions, comments, Director Ryan?
Thank you, Chairman. So if we can go back a slide to, there we go. The next one, slide 27. Cool. Can we talk about labor optimization where it says head count and position type and just kind of dive a little more into that to understand what that means? My question for like the three service boards is, are you reducing staff? Where are you at with staffing levels in comparison to 2019? And are you working directly with the union to make sure that some of the recommendations that are coming out here are realistic and in line with the collective bargaining agreement and making sure, like, are you guys working with your union partners to make sure that what you're doing is realistic and getting their opinion on ways to find efficiencies?
Sure, and good morning. I'm happy to jump in there. First, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to highlight the culture of efficiency that I feel we have at CTA in many regards and dive in on the details that I agree sometimes aren't always highlighted. We want to make sure people appreciate that focus that we have as an agency. To your question, Director Ryan, absolutely. We work closely with our unions in any labor discussion. For CTA, the labor optimization that's listed here is not a headcount reduction. Rather, it's a focus on finding efficiencies in things such as eliminating benefits from a salary perspective that we had in place to inspire new hires across the pandemic. So sunsetting some of those hiring incentives that were in place specifically to get our workforce up, which successfully did achieve that goal. That's already been in place and something that we worked closely with the union around instituting and both sunsetting, and they're partners in that at every step of the way. We also look at different opportunities from a part-time perspective, potentially ways that we already have rules in place to make sure we're maximizing savings. But those rules are all ones that we agreed upon with our labor partners, and just making sure we're getting the benefit from those agreements that we have in place with them first and foremost.
Good morning. As Nora has said, yes, we will work with our labor partners. What has been presented are the options that we would consider if the legislators don't figure out the fiscal cliff. But we also will look at positions based on what we need. You know, is it positions that we can live without, or do we need them? We will not only just look at the contract side, but we'll look at the management side across the board. But today, we have not started to specifically say what those positions are. We are preparing and have messaged to our employees that there may be a possibility that we will have to look at where we will be making cuts if we come to that conclusion. The prayer and the hope is that this all gets figured out.
Excuse me, but then what is your position addressing the collective bargaining agreements and pension obligations that are protecting workers?
So our position, if we have to go down this pathway, we will of course have to bring our labor partners in, have a conversation, and begin to, figure out how do we make the cuts and where can we do it where it doesn't have the, most greatest impact on employees. But today we have not started to have that conversation, but we are prepared if we need to. We will bring in, Metro has 14 labor agreements, 17 unions, 14 different labor agreements. So today, to say that we've started that conversation, we haven't, but we have qualified individuals on the team that would be prepared to start having that if we need to.
Good morning. I'm Melinda Metzger from PACE. Yes, we always are talking to our labor partners. We actually have 11 different units, labor units that we work with, and we are very concerned and going to continue to watch that their pensions and their positions are protected as much as possible. I will state that the savings that you see in here do not have a lot from the PACE side of the house, and the reason why they don't is that we, following COVID, we cut back on 20 routes. So we've already made the labor changes that we needed to make to have cost savings in place. And right now, we're in a period of growth. I'm hoping that this will continue as we get funding to continue to hire drivers and put more service on the road. We have really been focused on putting more service on the road, and we have actually now, we're at a point where we have more service on the road than we did back in 2019. So right now, that's our course. If there's not funding, that course will change dramatically, and we will have to work with our unions and determine the most appropriate course for where we go in the future.
Thank you both for your responses. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Ms. Metzger, your head count to budget, a little bigger than the other two. I know you have job fairs constantly, but comment on your head count to budget.
So our head count to budget, as I indicated, we are above 2019 levels at this point. We are below what we want to be at. We're about 125 drivers short right now. The interesting point is that PACE keeps growing our service. As we get more drivers in place, we will put more service out. So then we need more headcount. So we reach where we want to be, and then we have to grow it again because we put more service out. Right now, we have something like 200 drivers in training. And as you indicated, Chairman Dillard, we have every Thursday, we have 2 hiring events, hire on the spot events, 9:30 and 1:30 in our Arlington Heights corporate headquarters is one location. The other location is our new Markham campus. We are hiring every Thursday there at 9:30 and 1:30. So we continue to try and get more people invested in transit. It's a great job, great opportunities. In the case of PACE, a lot of the people in our organization have moved up through the ranks, learn it from the bottom up, which is a wonderful thing. But the difficult part for PACE, CTA, and Metro, I'm going to speak for all of us, is that it's hard to get people who want to work full-time jobs or even part-time jobs that are in the office or in a bus, in a train. A lot of people want to work from home, and we're constantly battling that, trying to get people involved in our organization.
Yeah, I would just add, Melinda, that there is a challenge there, but I think we've all seen a lot of successes too over the past years. I mean, at CTA, we've hired over 5,000 people in the past 2 years. It's monumental, the work that's been done there. So it shows how possible it is and how with more funding, we can all only continue to grow as those efforts are put into place.
No, you've done a remarkable job lately of filling those spots. You want to, as Rob Nash and I were both in Springfield for these hearings, I know one of the chairmen of the major committees talked about your overtime. I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I usually explain it to people is I bet that much of that overtime is due to the hundreds of vacancies that you had, especially for bus operators or train operators. And those employees who put in that overtime helped you provide the kind of service that everybody wants. And yes, there were ghost buses, but it would be a lot worse, I assume, without that overtime. But I assume a lot of that overtime is because you had some monumental vacancies immediately post-COVID and, and continuing up to recently where you're really back to normal service.
Yes, thanks, Chairman Dillard, for raising that. I know that's been a question that's come up regarding overtime. You're exactly right that overtime tells a larger story when it has to be used. From a frontline perspective, it is a story about how we have constantly strived every day to put out as much service as possible for our riders. And sometimes that does involve using overtime, which of course, as you all know, is something that's agreed upon with our union partners. And there are rules in place regarding it and something that the workers have bargained for to have an option available to them. Overtime also tells a story on the capital side. I think you see a lot of infrastructure employees who may use that. And what you're seeing there is CTA's constant striving to constantly improve our system from a capital perspective. That work is often done on the weekends or overnight, and often to minimize, again, impact to riders. And overtime can be used in that circumstance as well. You're correct also, Chairman, that it's decreased as we have hired. We've seen that number decreasing across the months that we've seen hiring hit high marks, and we expect to continue to see it to decrease. I'm looking closely at it to make sure that it's as tight as possible in the coming year ahead.
Thank you. And in case I forget, you're doing a tremendous job since you took over. So deeply appreciate it, including your appearances out amongst the riding public, which I did not go unnoticed to a lot of people. So you're doing a great job, Nora, as expected. Dr. Sager.
Thank you, Chairman. I do appreciate the opportunity, but also appreciate the fact that you brought up a big question that is out there. It's a question that has been raised and pointed out in the media, and certainly is a part of the conversation among colleagues down in Springfield. So I think that it is something that we need to address. I want to thank you all for your significant efforts and accomplishments in terms of being able to onboard more individuals who are talented and qualified and professionals in terms of meeting the service needs of our region. So I commend you on that. I guess my concern is that those types of questions with regards to large overtime payments are going to continue to, quote unquote, kind of stick with us and haunt us. It's not going to be something that we're easily going to get past, but we must get past it. So I'm asking you all as a panel, as colleagues, what is the response that we are providing universally to this major question so that we can move on and point out the primary effort here, which is indeed, as you've already stated, providing services as needed. So what's the collaborative efforts?
I think what has already been mentioned by Nora and Metra both is that we're hiring, and that is going to affect our overtime. Our overtime in 2021 was low. As we came out of COVID, we didn't have enough drivers for our system. Our overtime went higher. And now what we're seeing is that number coming back down. We have a very strict policy on overtime at my organization. I'm sure the other two do also, where there are people who are signing off on at higher levels on people who do get overtime. It is undertaken when it's necessary. Most of our overtime is in bus drivers, period. And the reason why is, again, we don't have enough drivers for the system. We want to put the service out. As Nora indicated, we do have some work that has to be done during odd hours, evening, weekends, and we may authorize overtime if we can't get that work done during the regular hours. But what I will tell you is, from our standpoint, and I'm sure the other transit agencies say the same thing, is that we're watching it. We continue to control that. We don't want to see rampant overtime. In our organization, we do not see that. As we get more drivers in the system, that will even out some. There's the one other thing that I want to state about overtime. There is always scheduled overtime. There's unscheduled and scheduled overtime. So the scheduled overtime is, we know we have a piece of work that we want to do. There's not enough work for a full-time bus operator. Or it's not cost effective to add a full-time bus operator because the work isn't a big enough piece. So we will schedule some overtime for our employees, and they pick that in accordance with their contract. There's union rules. But then, and that we control, we know how much scheduled overtime we're going to put in. And then we have unscheduled when we don't have enough drivers or someone misses, that we put additional overtime out there.
What's the federal regulations with respect, like a airline pilot, to how much overtime a driver of a bus can have?
The rule is you have to have 8 hours off, and you can't work more than, you have to have a day off in 14 days. So that's the rule that we abide by. Obviously, most of our drivers have a lot more than that.
Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad you made that comment about overtime, because I know in some cases, overtime is used in lieu of having to hire a full-time employee. That can be an intelligent way for that to be utilized without necessarily violating rules and agreements. So I appreciate that. My question was, I know that you and Nora, there's similarities between PACE drivers and, say, CTA bus drivers. And I thought in the past there was going to be an initiative where the hiring elements were going to be combined so there could be more efficiency. Is that something that is taking place, or is that something that really has not really materialized?
We have different operations. We have different union contracts that we abide by. And on top of that, we are really spread out. We're over 2,600 square miles. So our garages are all over the place. There's really no way to hire together in this kind of setup. The way we operate, our equipment is different. Our operating environment is different. We do different things. For example, we operate on the shoulder. CTA does not operate on the shoulder. They operate Ls. We don't operate Ls. We have paratransit equipment. We have all sorts of different ways we operate. We use contractors who have to abide by our standards as well as our own employees. So merging those together would be extremely difficult.
And I would just add, I think practices of successful hiring are universal and are applied by both PACE and CTA. And that's where a lot of our success in hiring has come from. CTA currently has more bus operators than we did in 2019. Our bus operator hiring has been wildly successful. So I think those tenets of what that involves in terms of outreach, ease of application, technological advancements, and making it easy for people to apply are things that I know PACE and CTA both apply in a universal way as good practice.
I would just like to add also for Metro, I think it's important that the conversation and education around overtime continues, and that overtime is not just someone just sitting and taking advantage of the system. That overtime is managed, is controlled, and there could be things that cause you to have overtime, such as maintenance. Nora talked about capital projects. Sometimes we have to do those on the weekend at night. You need those individuals to do that work, such as flagging the train through to make sure that there's safety. There could be a service interruption, incident that happens on the railroad. So we want to make sure that the legislators understand that overtime for Metro, PACE, and CTA, I believe, is managed, is controlled, and monitored. And our intention is to make sure that we are controlling that overtime so that we can answer the call when we have an inquiry.
And I would just add, in addition to what Janice is saying, at CTA, we track also how we compare to other peer agencies to kind of test if that this is being managed appropriately. And overtime as a share of our overall wages at CTA is the lowest of all of our peers in Philadelphia, Boston, Atlanta, DC, and New York. So just to give you that context, I think Director Sager, you talked about making sure we have a response to this issue as it comes up. And I think a lot of it is contextualizing it to make sure people understand the full story.
And I don't know what you've done, Nora or Melinda or Janice, on overtime, but obviously, you need to go see Representative Moylan, who really is zeroed in on this, kind of explain the circumstances. I would remind him that the state of Illinois and many of its agencies has overtime issues as well. So it's not just transit. They have overtime issues at the Department of Corrections and other places that, that are there. I would also see Representative Marcus Evans, who is pretty sympathetic, I think, with the overtime. And I don't know on that list of overtime, and sometimes the annual salary would, people look at that at Springfield and they raise their eyebrows. But I would bet the majority of those overtime hours are also, and we hear it all the time here from the public, of making sure that minorities and people of color have very good middle-class jobs. I bet you your list of overtime folks is probably majority people of color. And I think that's important to point out, that you are providing a very good, stable career for a lot of people in sectors that we hear all the time about equity and diversity. And I bet you your numbers, Nora, are pretty heavily laden to that segment. And you should clearly let legislators know you're providing a great career for people who are clamoring for a good existence in Chicagoland. Dr. Sager.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to belabor this too much, but I absolutely am incredibly pleased and grateful for the responses that you've had to the major question. I think it's rather easy, in my personal opinion, for us that sit on this board to understand that you are doing an exceptional job of managing that you are doing an exceptional job of onboarding individuals, that you are doing an exceptional job to manage the financial impact that overtime has. So I understand that, I support you, and I believe that. I think the challenge is that needs to be stated very strongly in common language in one voice, if you will, to the population that we serve, as well as to the legislators who are decision makers. So I just cannot strongly enough emphasize that I believe that we need to be speaking with one voice that identify all of the elements of justification that you have just articulated. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Director Carey, good morning.
To Dr. Sager's point, we are always on a quest for more and more transparency. Excuse me. And we report a lot of data. I don't know that today we do performance reporting, and each of you do a great job on that. Is there a way to, on a regular basis, to report overtime statistics? Excuse me, in terms of scheduled, unscheduled, examples of against peer agencies?
Yeah, we can certainly add those elements into the annual budget and then the quarterly reports too. And just, I guess, maybe to try and sort of keep us moving because there's an awful lot of other stuff we've got to want to get through as well. That the three service boards have been amazing in their response to the legislature on these very specific questions. And as Rob alluded to in his presentation earlier, there will be actually a hearing with the legislature April 2nd, I think it is. I think that's next week, isn't it? So that, to your point about speaking holistically, as Nora said, putting context around all of this is the next step that they are doing. It made a good headline, but there's a lot more to the story than sort of what a headline often tells. And I think that that's the opportunity that they're looking forward to, in a way, to sort of explain and put that context around both, the data, the reality, and the reasons why overtime and other scheduling occurs on the system. So,
Director Quateric.
First, congratulations, President Learson. Welcome to the board. And, thank you for being up and out in the system and really focusing on rider experience, cleanliness, comfort, reliability, smoking in particular you've taken on. So thanks from a daily rider. Also wanted to say thanks to each of you for taking the ordinance seriously. I think the RTA board, and I want to thank all my colleagues too, for us to really put something in an ordinance and ask you to put out some hard truths. I think when we talked about this in January, there was a sense that really being honest and transparent about what the consequences are of the cliff were scary, and they are, but that's what we're living through. And I think that getting that out to the public and understanding it and the coverage of this really resonates. And I think that started with us asking you to work together and doing so and coming back to us. So really appreciate that. I think it's a response to the collaboration that the General Assembly in particular has been asking us to do. One point on the efficiencies. This is a critical component to our argument to Springfield, that we're doing everything we can. We've seen this across our sister agencies, whether it's Chicago Public Schools or others, really figuring out everything that we can do ourselves first to make that case down to Springfield. We've heard it directly for them. So I think a sort of second Director Carey's comments, really putting some detail and putting some deadlines and some timelines on these efficiencies so that we can also come back to you and hold you accountable, hold ourselves accountable, that we're delivering on them. And we have some good peer metropolitan regions to look to. The RTA summit that's coming up will have the DC director, WMATA. They have a pretty good scheme on how to do that. And Philadelphia, SEPTA also has a pretty large book that their board follows every year. And it's been good. And again, there's confidence in those efficiencies and encourage you to do that. The third piece is a question. What can we do together? Again, responding to this call from the General Assembly for us to have a stronger regional approach in everything we do. What can we do? Director Lewis brought up, hiring. What are the things that we can do now, and what can we do in the future that we can start working on and show that there's progress along these lines?
I'm happy to jump.
Yeah, so it's together. So, if this is joint procurement, management contracts, co-location and real estate, what are the things that together all of you through an intergovernmental agreement, an MOU, action from us, things the RTA can take? What are those things that can be regionalized, done together to help address the cliff?
Excuse me, Roger, do you mind going back to the slide of coordinating improvements from enhancement? I believe it's, there you go. Okay, so just in general, to answer some of the, how we're gonna keep track of these and how we're gonna measure some of these, we are putting it through we're going to add these through the budget process. So in our list of requirements, so that's gonna be included in there. We have had this discussion with the CFOs as well and their budget teams, and so we're putting that there. Leanne mentioned quarterly reporting back. There will be also another avenue for us to do this. And then we listed some of these here, and in our memo, the backing up the deck and the resolution, we included a little bit more detail on these as well. And these are areas that, again, we will continue to explore. We will make it more public that we're already doing this. We're gonna put a lot of these on paper as well. And you're right, we looked at WMATA and what they have done. We held a few meetings with them, and they provided a great list of things that we can do and how we can document these. And so we're learning from them as well. And I'll also take this opportunity to thank the CFOs, the service boards who met with me every 2 weeks to talk and discuss about these, sometimes for 3 hours or so or more on a Friday, which was greatly appreciated. And so, again, these will continue. We will continue to report back to the board on these.
I might just add that the best kept secret is that we talk every day. All of us talk every day, and there's a lot of things that we do well together. Fairs are one of them. CTA and PACE have always had a coordinated fair program. Metra is adding on onto the Ventra program. Service schedule coordination. We meet, our planning departments meet all the time on that. Joint projects, we're working with Metra. We just completed the Homewood Station joint project. We have a bus terminal there. They were doing the station. Metra did it. We gave them the money. Harvey Transit Center, another project that we're working on together. We have our Pace Van Go program at Metra and CTA stations. We have to talk to both of them to get locations for our vehicles, and everyone's in agreement. If we can do a better job for our customers, we always are all in agreement. So we do a lot of coordination and we do a lot of partnership. And we're going to continue to reach out and do that in the future.
I would just add or maybe give a little teeth to the comments there. Fair coordination is an area that would be helpful as we talk about regional connectivity. MetroPace, CTA, seamless for our riders and for any visitors that come into the region is another area of collaboration. Regional service planning would be an area that we could all work together and improve. We do it now, but it would be great if there was a way to have that collaboration coordinated and someone in the center controlling that coordination, and we're working with them.
Yeah, and I'd echo what's been said in the two main categories. I think in terms of fair policy and integration, a lot's been done. There's a lot more that can be done. I think it's important to highlight what we've done together because some of the obstacles they're not for lack of a commitment to coordination. You look at some of the capital investment that's needed to accomplish the type of fair integration that I think people envision. It's not that we're not standing ready to talk to each other and coordinate about that. That's why we've achieved what we have so far and look forward to further coordination. I think in service planning as well, there's some real concrete studies that have been done and are currently underway. With PACE and CTA, we have several corridor studies underway where we look to improve street infrastructure for buses, given that we share so much of those goals of buses running smoothly and as quickly as possible. We would continue that and look to even further opportunities for collaboration in those studies. With Metro, we're working with the county on a study to identify appropriate places for rail infill stations. That type of formal planning and studying really does produce great results for the customer in our region in terms of service planning, and we continue to stand ready to build on that.
And I'll just conclude with, and thank you, I didn't script those guys for those comments, but I mean, that is consistent with the themes, the 3 bucket areas that we've been talking long about. So rolling up some of those functions to a regional level, freeing these guys up to participate, but also give them more time and space to do what they do best, which is operate the bus and the train systems. And so taking a regional focus on fares, service standards and service delivery, and then the capital prioritization. They're the core 3 buckets, and you just heard that echoed from all 3 of them. So that's the work we continue to want to do in terms of some of the reforms going forward.
Other questions? So Leanne, just to keep us moving here, cognizant of time, anything else the 3 of them need to add?
And we're going to keep the 3
them
service
up
boards
there.
up here, but we're going to switch Kevin out. from the efficiency space and
Ms.
talk
Malik,
about
oh.
the other two themes that was part of the resolution. Don't want to give those other two components short shrift. So talk about the impacts of should we not secure additional revenue and we are faced with the fiscal cliff. And then the other side, the more optimistic and hopeful side of what it could look like if we're able to fill that gap, secure more revenues, and identify a more robust transit system for the region. So with that, I'll let Malik jump in. Oh, sorry, we're going straight to Nora. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and I expect it'll transition, okay, to the first CTA slide. Okay. So I'm first to kick off this conversation, and I think you all know from looking at the material and thinking about it, that these are painful scenarios to look at. Part of me, has been searching for an adjective to do it justice. I think we've heard devastating, things like that, and everything seems to fall short of what we're talking about here. And even kind of the act of sitting around tables and looking at PowerPoint slides seems to almost suggest that there's some option here that's palatable, and there is none, right? We're going to look through specifics here of what would happen, but what you're going to see, particularly from a CTA perspective, this is not a different CTA. This would really be no longer CTA as we know it without the funding that we're talking about. A mass transit system running through a city the size of Chicago is meant to be a constant flow. When you change that characteristic, you've changed the identity of who we are and what we serve for the people of our city. I also want to, level set and remind people some things that have been said here. This conversation is taking place when CTA has achieved much in the past few years around its service. We've hired, as I've said, 5,000 people in the past 2 years. We have more bus operators than we did in 2019. Our service schedules from 2019, we've now met them, and we are consistently delivering high levels of that service, near 100% of it on the bus side every day. That means those issues like ghost buses and the ones that have haunted us, no pun intended, around ghosts, for the past several years are being addressed, and our customers are getting the service they deserve. You saw just this week, on Monday, we announced the frequent bus network, and in that announcement is more than just those 20 routes that you're going to see rolled out across the year with 10 minutes or better service. In that announcement is a sign of our strength and what we've achieved, and that we're thriving at a level we haven't seen in years. So to talk about this type of an impact in this moment is particularly potent and terrifying for those of us, given the work we've achieved. If you look at here, this is what we laid out in terms of the impact. Purposefully, you do not see a geographic impact here. That is for reasons I'm sure you'll hear from the other agencies. To implement a service cut would require federally mandated reviews such as a Title VI analyses, as well as engagement with the public extensively to talk about what this would be. So what we did instead here is really talk about the scale of the impact. So of our 8 rail lines, 4 of them would see service suspended across an entire branch. More than 70 miles of rail service would be lost. 50 of our stations would be closed. The remaining service would see frequency reduced by almost a quarter. On the bus side, 74 bus routes would be eliminated. That's over half of the bus routes across our system. And what that means is that CTA on the bus side, for example, would drop from being one of the largest agencies in the country to having fewer bus routes than Madison, Wisconsin, or Kansas City. And I think that's pretty jarring when we think about where Chicago sits in terms of its economy and what we would be layering on top of it that would not support the economy it deserves. The impacts, as you've heard, would mean that 1 in 5 Chicago workers would not have a way to get to their job. 500,000 Chicago residents would lose access to a bus route within a half mile of their home. And the trains and buses that remained would be massively overcrowded. And I think that's a key that even gets missed here when you talk about a service impact and the potential elimination of service. what remains would be essentially unrideable for millions of people across our region. As a reminder of who our riders are at CTA, more than a third of CTA riders make less than $25,000 a year. These individuals cannot afford a car, and for them, the CTA service is literally life-saving. So when you talk about cutting this service, make no mistake that no one is spared from the impact here, but there are certain people in our region for whom this would be impactful in a way that is acute and nearly life-threatening in terms of losing access to food, medical care, and jobs. On the bus side, the routes that would be potentially eliminated with no funding, they'd be in peak hours as well as feeder routes, as we call them, so across the board in the type of service that would be impacted. And 60% of those bus routes would be eliminated, as I discussed. So next slide. You see here a map to kind of show those eliminations, and on the left-hand side is our current service from the bus and rail perspective. On the right-hand side in the red, you get a sense of the breadth and impact of the service that would be eliminated here. The exercise that we did here produced a frequency on the right-hand side that would maintain a 1-mile space transit grid across our service area. This would mean that service would expand across the region, but in a way that is entirely less accessible than what we currently have now. And what you're going to see, and I'm going to bring up, when you talk about creating a mile access versus a half mile, what you're talking about is an infringement on people's freedom and way of life to move about their life. And you'll see it on the flip side when we talk about what funding could provide and the freedom and opportunity that comes with it. On the maps you see here, more than 20 schools. You know, it's important to remember not just people and accessing jobs, but schools that serve tens of thousands of students would lose CTA service for their students, including CPS elementary schools, major universities, and parochial schools alike. During rush hour, trains and buses would have a capacity of over 100%, something more upwards of 120%. Many riders, as a result, would be left behind at their bus or rail station. On the South Lakefront, for example, no customer would be able to board after the bus would get north of 67th and heading to the loop, by our calculations as to how crowded that bus would remain. Something also to keep in mind here is the ridership loss that would have happened. So there's a cascading impact, as Leanne talked about. When you cut service, you lose riders, you lose funding as a result. We know from cuts that CTA has made in the past, nearly 20 years ago in 2007, for example, we cut 18% of bus service and 9% of rail service, and that translated to a 20% ridership loss. So whatever service impact you see, you can count that multiple times over in terms of the riderships that you would lose as a result of that. Next slide. As you also asked, we put together scenarios of what having full funding to the 1.5 billion level that we are asking for would provide us. And we see it, again, no different than the frequent bus network that we saw get released this week and the opportunity and the frequency that is provided there. But a $1.5 billion investment would transform mobility and economic mobility for the region. You know, no single public service agency in Chicago touches as many individuals as CTA does. For example, Chicago's Streets and Sanitation Department collects garbage from 600,000 people. Chicago Public Libraries serves about 13,000 people every day. About 320,000 students are enrolled in Chicago Public Schools, and the Park District welcomes about 100,000 visitors a day. As we know now, we serve 1 million riders every single day. When you talk about investment impacting people and the payoff, it's huge when you talk about public transit. With $1.5 billion on the bus side, we would establish a full frequent bus network, investing in over 40 routes at a minimum of 8 frequencies all day, 8-minute frequency, all day, every day. This would mean that over 94% of Chicago residents would have an all-day transit option within just a short walk. That's nearly all Chicago residents. More riders on rail are riding in the midday, evenings, and overnight in this scenario as well. And we would take lessons from our national and international peers and deliver frequent rail throughout the day, 24 hours a day. You know, we talk a lot about scheduled service delivery in mass transit and at CTA. Something I've asked my staff to keep an eye on is really when CTA is running at its best, you would not even need a schedule because you would be walking up to your bus line or your rail line and know it would be coming in just minutes. So that is the goal, and that's what we know agencies around the world provide their cities. And with $1.5 billion, that's what you would get in Chicago. Next slide. Of course, the gap we're talking about currently is an operational one, but it's important to think about the complement on the capital side. Even before you get to what additional capital investment would mean, just as a reminder, in terms of we've gotten billions of dollars of capital investment over the past few years at CTA from all levels of government. So to not provide the appropriate commensurate operational funding is perhaps one of the most inefficient things a region could do for itself. We need to use those capital investments to their maximum potential by providing operating funding at the level that we need. You see here on this slide a list of ways in which capital investment can unlock further upgrades. We could modernize our bus and rail fleets, achieve a fully accessible regional transit network, build 6 new CTA rail infill stations, rebuild the Forest Park branch on the I-290 corridor, eliminate the slow zones that we see on our system, and establish 100 miles of dedicated bus lanes. These are appropriate and achievable goals with the right type of investment across our system. I'd also say, just before we leave this slide, one of those achievements of the hiring that we've done over the past few years means that when you see impact on CTA service currently, and I know that service issues still arise, of course, but what you're seeing is now evidence of the lack of funding in our system. The slow zone conversation is directly tied to the state of good repair issues that we have. What you're seeing is issues of intrusions on the right-of-way or other disturbances on the system that so badly need further investment in security and continued focus on that. So I think it's an important moment in the funding conversation to make sure people understand that the past few years have been a discussion of a labor workforce issue. And when we see challenges now with service, what we're seeing is a discussion that should directly inform the funding conversation. Next slide. This slide is meant to capture, as a reminder, we all know that CTA is more than just a transit agency, and the programs that are associated with our work directly impact and build our communities in significant ways. Something we're incredibly proud of is the years of achievements of our Second Chance program. Our current program has 315 spaces for people to have jobs and focus on the importance of cleaning in particular. With more funding, we could expand that program. I'd like to also say we are incredibly proud so far this year, the Second Chance program, whereas in previous years, by this point in the year, we had turned 8 second chance apprentices into permanent CTA employees. At this point this year, we have 29 employees that have become permanent CTA employees from the apprentice program. It's moving at rapid rates and seeing incredible results that are changing people's lives and their families' lives. And when you talk about investing in CTA, you're talking about building programs like that. As well as ETOD and our land use footprint more broadly in the region. This is a focus of ours, and we could do much more with further funding in terms of transit-oriented development and developing the region in that way. We would, for example, establish a transit Office of Equitable Transit-Oriented Development office that we would use to work even with our regional partners to build out that planning, because there is a lot of exciting work that could be done there as well. Just to close out, when we talk about impact of investing in transit, we've done work with Argonne and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to further tell that story. As I said, the impact always almost falls short with words when we talk about it. But an investment of transit returns itself 13 times over with induced growth and cost savings for our region. Trips across the region would be 10% faster, and the hours spent in a car across the region would decrease by nearly 25%. The region would save $19 billion annually in travel cost savings. That's $10 billion due to travel time savings and $8 billion due to reduced car ownership rates. Greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by over 10%, and nearly 80,000 jobs would be created from an investment like $1.5 billion in transit. So at this point, I'll turn it over to my peers, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk about investment in CTA.
Chairman, can we ask questions of CTA first before I go to the others?
Sure, go ahead, Director.
Okay, thank you. First off, Acting President Learson, just want to echo the words of Chairman Dillard and Director Katark that you've been doing an amazing job out of the frying pan and into the fire as Acting President of the CTA at such an important time. So I commend you on being out in the system and really advocating for the riders. So thank you for your leadership. Your presentation, I think, has been very compelling that we need to get funding for transit. I'm also, as an aside, want to commend Executive Director Metzger. I've been so impressed getting to know you in the last several months about your leadership at PACE. But with respect to CTA and your presentation, I'm wondering if you could remind us how many employees were laid off in 2009 for the Great Recession at that time, and then how many employees would you anticipate having to lay off if we didn't get the funding this go around?
Sure. And Director, I would have to get you the exact number in 2009 of layoffs, so I'd have to follow up with that. With regards to what an impact like this would mean on our workforce currently, you're talking upwards of 2,000 people at CTA that would lose their jobs as a result of a cut like this if funding wasn't provided. And as a reminder, as Chairman Dillard mentioned earlier, our workforce provides fantastic, good-paying career growth jobs to people across the region. And over 40% of our employee base actually comes from disadvantaged zip codes in this region. Those jobs are impactful for our region, in various deep ways. So it's a scary number to look at, and I hope we don't come anywhere close to it.
Thank you. My follow-up question, if we were to receive more than the $780 million just to get us to the present, but to get that $1.5 billion, I think you made a lot of compelling arguments about what can be the future. Can you speak about safety and security? What would that mean to riders?
Absolutely. And we would welcome a regional discussion on safety and security. I know we talked about fare integration and we talked about service planning, but given the critical nature of that issue in particular, we would welcome further resources to come out of this $1.5 billion from a regional perspective as well. And I think that's a conversation to have as a group on that as well.
And just to generalize, Dennis, the more riders you have and the shorter periods of time where people are standing on L platforms or bus stations, the crime goes down. And there's a much bigger discussion to have, but this type of service would clearly improve safety. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Chairman Dillard, I think we know what helps security. It's law enforcement as well as innovative approaches to improve the customer service experience. So we know the elements there that help improve this situation. This last year in our budget, we put aside $3 million to do some work to think about new customer-friendly ways to improve the customer experience from a security perspective. But law enforcement is the foundation. And that's something that we would welcome further discussion on increasing resources around.
And just one other point on that, in the labor bill, they have a proposal where there would be a new police force, I guess, for lack of a better word. We're going to have lots of discussions on that, but it's got to include Director Snelling or Superintendent Snelling in that conversation, because her system really is the Chicago Police Department's purview, where Metro has its own force, and Melinda's people usually rely on the local police force. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question. I know in the 2020, when we had the pandemic, there was a disproportionate number of service employees that took the CTA, so the impact on service workers was substantial. What do you anticipate would be in this doomsday scenario, the proportionality relative to service workers, if in fact those cuts had to be implemented, or is there any feel for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a part of my highlighting of the income level of CTA riders that we look at it was to highlight the impact would absolutely be disproportionately on certain aspects of our region. And just like the pandemic, like you say, those would be essential workers that rely on us that would have no other place to turn. We can get some more numbers around kind of forecasting how that would impact. I think that's a great point we could build out in addition to focusing on who we know rides currently.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the CTA? Yes.
Hi.
Director Gaddy.
Can you talk about why the 20% budget reduction would lead to such an outsized decrease in service, like the 20-40 ratio?
Sure, I know that was a regional number that was also put out, so I can give RTA a chance to kind of speak specifically to that. I know that inflationary costs are a component of what got highlighted by RTA. For more detail, I do believe our Chief Financial Officer at CTA is also on the call, who could chime in, Tom McCone, to kind of lay out the connection between those two numbers.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Let me jump in here on that one. Just to note that there are a number of fixed costs that are also present in our budget, and I'm certain that Metro and Pace have those fixed costs as well. So when we look to reduce expenses, there are certain costs that you just can't reduce. So for instance, we have a relatively high payment on our pension obligation bond. That can be over $100 million a year, and that can't be reduced. So you look for those costs that do have that flexibility, and that's where you have service, right? About 90% of our flexible budget is going into that service. And so you have to cut more from that flexible part because you can't cut from some of those fixed costs that are present in your budget. At least that's the way it looks at CTA. I would defer to RTA for that regional number.
Yeah, Director, I'll just jump in for a second. So on both sides of the equation, we looked at, as Tom said, fixed versus variable costs that will still have availability of vehicles to add service quickly overnight, as Nora was mentioning, as a priority for CTA, where you could, for Metro CTA and Pace in off-peak hours, could add 30 to 50% frequency increases because the frequency is lower. In the peak, it could be 10%. So it would vary throughout the day. It would be based on availability of crew and vehicles, but the impacts are on variable costs because we are already paying for some of the things out of the amount of money we would have left over or would have access to even if we got 1.5 billion.
I just would add the one point that I don't think was made, that we're also going to have a steep revenue loss from all the ridership loss. So that adds into that other 20%.
Director Kucerek.
Just thank you for the presentation, and I wanted to emphasize really how regional the CTA system is, that this is not exclusively a Chicago problem, that, the CTA currently serves close to 40 suburbs, and the connecting traffic that happens from other modes, that this is really a network issue. And this is the core of the system, and how important it is to remember that all of these things need to work together. But a question to emphasize that regional impact, do you have data on how many of the CTA employees are outside of the city of Chicago?
We can get you that data. We do have it. Yeah, I think that's a really great point in terms of the job loss impact across the region that would be felt. As I'm hearing you speak also, I think, we talk a lot about here and we're showcasing our regional planning efforts together. Regionalization really comes from frequency, right? So that connectivity absolutely comes from planning and thinking through together, but a truly thriving regional system is running frequent service. And that you get connectivity from high frequency. So if you start to strip frequency and access, you're depleting the regionalization that I think we all have as a goal here.
Director Yonan.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, perhaps just kind of making the comment now, I know for the next two presentations, we continue to talk about that service delivery improvements, and there's a, kind of queue of some of the initiatives, the things that you're doing does kind of allude to some collaboration with the DOTs. But once again, I always want to take that opportunity to mention so much more, with what CTA and, PACE is doing with some of the local DOTs, the other units of government that are really important to just tell that story to all legislators, from the county executives to some of these mayors and managers, that your system really depends on the infrastructure. And you had mentioned the importance of some of these roads, streets, not only being improved for, CTA buses, but also on the signal side. We shouldn't be waiting for the DOTs who have to fix their roads and bridges to come up with a signal preemption plan. And once again, it's a great story to tell that those are the kind of things that transit's going to take the lead on, not waiting for the DOTs who have their own issues to be able to say that's going to be part of these service deliveries. We want to lead that effort. So I think, again, that just draws a lot more legislators into your conversation and understanding. So want to continue to make that comment as to the importance of that. So thanks again, and you're doing a great job with this role.
Thank you. Thanks for adding that. That's a really important point. And I think even in the efficiencies discussion, there's money savings in transit signal priority and buses flowing at a more efficient rate. So it's all connected in terms of showcasing the benefits of those efforts and the role that the DOTs play in that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Nora? If not, let's move on to, I think Metra's next on the slide deck. Janice,
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to get right on through here so that Melinda can take all the questions that you may have.
Thank you.
But as we continue to operate service within the 6 counties that we serve, Cook, Will, Lake, DuPage, Kane, and McHenry, Metra, going over the fiscal cliff would be disastrous for us. We would have to cut service to more than 40% in 2026, and our progress that we have been making towards regional rail service would be halted and reversed. Next slide, please. No, go back. Sorry. Okay. The theme on the top of the slide says Metro cuts destroy connections throughout the region. I would like to say Metro's cuts would significantly have an impact throughout the region. What does that mean? It means on 8 of our 11 lines, trains would run every hour on weekdays and every 2 hours on weekends. On the other 3 lines, service would be limited to peak period only, with 3 trains in and 3 trains out. Service would start later and end earlier. Metro would not be an option for many essential workers who need service outside of the peak period. Only very limited express train service would remain. The results would be extreme overcrowding throughout the region, with riders left on the platform because trains would be too full. There also could be a major consequence that is not so obvious. These cuts would not be easy to reverse should funding materialize later. Metro has either no or partial control of 9 of our 11 lines. We fight with the freight carriers for every slot on our schedule. If we lose slots because we cut service, it could take 5 to 10 years or more to get them back. and probably only after significant negotiation with freight partners. Metro has seen this play out before. Budget-related service cuts in 2018 have yet to be restored despite available funding and despite more than 5 years of negotiations. Next slide, please. If you look at this slide, I want you to zoom in to the center where you see the numbers in red. This represents, under this fiscal cliff scenario, the number of fewer trains Metro would operate on the weekday would be 267, and the number of fewer trains we'd operate on the weekend would be 189. This represents 45% average service cuts on the weekdays and a 40% average service cut on the weekends. Next slide. Just wanted to give you a visual. If you look there, you say, I see black and I see red. What are you saying to me, Janice? The illustration would show every red train on this graphic represents 10 Metro trains no longer operating each service day, whether it's the weekday or the weekend. So I'll just let you look at that for a minute. 10 trains per each red would be not in operation weekday or weekend. A significant impact. Next slide, please. Good news for us. On the flip side, if they figure this out in Springfield and there is sustainable funding, what would we do? We're prepared. We have continued to plan for the expansion and the growth of our system, of our riders. In our 2025 budget, Metro laid out a 5-year program service expansion that would reduce 2-hour service gaps on most lines, enhance service on 3 more limited service lines, pilot regional rail style 30-minute service on several lines. The program of service improvement would leverage Metro's existing infrastructure and existing rolling stock that's on order. The 5-year implementation timeline would allow for an adequate ramp up for staffing and negotiation with host railroads to implement the service. Next slide. In addition to operating improvements Metro can make with existing infrastructure, we are exploring additional options in our system-wide network plan to deliver the next phase of regional rail. This is what we would do with additional sustainable funding as Springfield figures this out. This includes developing different concepts to run frequent all-day service on different rail lines, depending on the rider demand, required infrastructure, and freight partner buy-in. It's important to know that as we plan our growth for the future, we have to also be transparent and say we have to work with the freight railroads and we have to be able to bring them along on this journey. But we're committed to doing that. One core concept includes pairing frequent all-stop service throughout the day to inner portion of a rail line with all-day express service on the outer portion of the line. Additional concepts include through running or connecting existing Metro lines in the downtown core, as well as providing improved O'Hare service. In other words, layman's term is have connectivity from the north to the south, the east, the west, system-wide connection on the Metro system. All of these options will require just additional operating funds. We just need some more funding, sustainable funding to do these things. But additional capital funding also will come into play because you would have to have the infrastructure in order to have the model of regional rail and service expansion that we are planning for in the future. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Janice. Any questions of Metro? If not, let's move on to Pace.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today at this really crucial time in transit's history. Before I begin, I want to thank all of you for your advocacy. I see many of you out at meetings, meeting with legislators, and really supporting transit, whether it's PACE, Metro, or CTA, so I thank you for that. As you know, PACE is responsible for providing public transportation in 274 unique communities across 3,600 square miles of urban, suburban, and rural areas in northeastern Illinois. In addition, we provide the 8A paratransit service for the entire region. So we're truly unique in what we do, and while we're small compared to CTA and Metro, we're the 13th largest in the country, just something to remember. So if we go down, to having to reduce all of our service, it's going to have a dramatic impact. And one of the questions that was stated earlier was, what is the impact on the service workers? And we saw it firsthand. When COVID hit, we went down immediately to 10% of our ridership. Within a couple of weeks, we were back up to 60% of our ridership. Why? Because we carried the service workers. We carried the hospital workers, the grocery store workers, the people who had to get to their jobs. They couldn't sit at home. They had to be there. And so it will have a dramatic effect on the service workers. PACE has been very efficient in the way we've operated our system. We've had to be. We cover such a large area and we don't have the funding to cover that area. So we do it in many different ways. We have our fixed route service, which is our bread and butter. But in addition, we have one of the largest van pool operations in the country. We have the second largest ADA paratransit service in the country, only behind New York. And we have contract carriers working with us. We have on-demand service that we do. We have dial-a-ride service that we do. And all of those funnel together. It's not like, well, the fixed route is separate from your paratransit service. We use those vehicles to do different things, to do on-demand, to do our van pool program where we keep a van at a station, at a CTA station or metro station, so that if you need to do the first mile, last mile, you can contact us, you can subscribe with us while the vehicle's sitting there for you. You call a day in advance, we'll give you a code, that vehicle's sitting there, you take it from metro or CTA to where you work, you bring it back at night, leave it there, we'll fuel it and get it ready for the next day. These are for the people who aren't going to work every day. Besides our regular van pool program, which carries people to their jobs and to industry every day. So as you've heard throughout this presentation from my colleagues, we are really at a critical crossroads. If sustainable investments are not made, PACE would be looking at service cuts that could dramatically reduce transit service across the 6 counties. PACE serves one of the country's largest suburban areas and provides the regional ADA paratransit service, both of which would be in jeopardy due to the potential service cuts. So this is a moment in time, a tale of 2 cities, one where we invest and build in a system that the residents of our regions choose to use versus one that offers drastically less service. So what does that mean? For PACE, it means all weekend fixed route service would be eliminated, stranding those who rely on transit for work, errands, and medical care. Late night service after 8 p.m. would disappear on 62 routes, and more frequently running routes could see headways increase from 30 minutes to 60 minutes between buses. ADA paratransit service, which is federally mandated, would not be eliminated, but its service area would be shrunk by 2/3 on weekends, leaving people with disabilities all over the region without reliable transportation. Our current work on our revision bus network, where we're looking at our entire system post-pandemic, and we're going to revamp the whole system to make it more efficient and make it better for our riders. That would be put on hold, as well as our expansion of our PACE Pulse program would also be put on hold. Next slide, please. So the impact of a smaller PACE network will be felt across the 6 counties, especially for those who rely on PACE fixed routes to connect to job services and to CTA and metro stations. The map on the right in red shows that almost every single route could be negatively affected in the PACE system. Next slide, please. ADA paratransit service is offered within a 3/4 mile buffer around all fixed route buses and heavy rail. The elimination of weekend fixed route service in the suburbs will mean a reduction of ADA paratransit service area, taking away transportation options for 15,000 certified riders, which would be approximately 466,000 trips on the weekend over a year. And as you've heard from Mr. Leonard Hyatt, the service is necessary. The service is what is needed for people with disabilities, and this would have a drastic impact on what's going on in the region. Next slide, please. On the contrary, we've already started adapting to changes in the post-pandemic market. Rather than trying to regain lapsed ridership by offering the same old, we have changed the way we do business. We have already trimmed our lowest performing bus routes and reinvested those resources into new and different service options as we continue to implement mobility options to meet the needs in the region. And we have made tremendous progress on our revision initiative, which is a planning study designed to reimagine our entire network for both current and future market demands. As part of this initiative, PACE is proposing service investments that would allow more residents to connect with regional transit network. With extensive community input, PACE has developed two concepts which will rethink suburban bus service and seek to address both ridership and coverage needs. The ridership concept includes the continued advancements of the PACE Pulse network, delivering arterial bus rapid transit in key corridors throughout the region, and improved frequency on other key PACE routes, which we've already highlighted in red on this map. Next slide, please. And given the vast complex makeup of the suburban service area, PACE also has to address service coverage needs. The coverage concept proposes to expand PACE's service footprint throughout the region, adding new fixed routes that operate every 60 minutes and on-demands to many areas that don't currently have service. As PACE finishes the public input process for the concept phase of revision, we're looking to incorporate a combination of ridership and coverage-oriented services as we move forward with the development of a network plan, which we will complete this year. Investing in both ridership and coverage will bring more transit to more people throughout all 6 counties. However, we need more funding to do so. Our estimate is we need an additional $150 million to implement the enhanced vision of suburban transit service. Next slide, please. Along with operating funds, always, capital investments are crucial to support our system, both now and for the future. This includes continued fleet and facility modernization, station development for expanded Pulse and express bus service, and investments in technology, such as our transit signal priority and that will improve both the bus speed and reliability of buses. This is a pivotal time for public transportation, and these services and the capital investments will allow PACE to provide a network that offers regional connectivity to our riders. With that, I will turn it back over to the RTA, and I'm happy to answer questions now or after the RTA's presentation.
Thanks, Melinda. Director Carey.
That's correct. That's operating funding, yes.
Thank you. Yes, Director Mondero.
Thank you, Chairman. This question is actually directed to both Metra and PACE. It's the same question I asked President Learson, which is if there is no additional funding, how many employees do you anticipate that you would have to reduce your force by?
We have anticipated our force would be reduced by about a little bit under 400 people.
The number that we provided to the RTA is about 635.
And Director Mondero, just since you raised this issue again, I want to follow up to your question previously about the 2009 cuts. It was about 1,000 employees that had to be laid off in 2009. And Director Katarg, your question about employees that live outside of the city of Chicago, it's 40% at CTA. So it is a regional issue.
Yep. Director Gorman.
Thank you. Melinda, you made an interesting comment. I mean, it is a pivotal time. And just addressing it, obviously you guys have spent much time together and going to Springfield and going on with this road show, and it's given you really the opportunity, you know, in transit right now to stress the importance of the need for the service boards to really coexist in the work that we all do, from the suburbs to the city and the, you know, economic development that's really, you know, needed for jobs and whatnot. And I just want to commend Pace, you know, for the extended services just beyond the bus utilization, especially in the bus services with Pace the Pulse, you know, services in what you do. But, you know, so I guess my question is how is it being received, you know, in Springfield, you know, for what you guys are doing, for the presentations that you're delivering with the elimination, and how is that being received?
You know, I think the process down in Springfield, I'm going to say, is an interesting one. There has been a lot of talk about governance, and we haven't gotten to the money aspect of this, and that is the important part of this whole process. I think the couple of comments that I have is, one, the CMAP report, and it was stated earlier by Kevin, we are one of the most efficient systems in the country. And when I say we, it's all of us. We all work very hard to put service on the street, which makes us have to be efficient, because to get more service out there, you have to just be efficient with your expenses. I think the second part of this is that the other best kept secret is we really work well together. You hear in the press, we're always fighting. When you did see the fighting, you're not seeing it right now, it was all because we didn't have enough funding. And so if CTA needed us to do something, we would be, well, wait a minute, who's going to fund this? That was the fighting that was going on. We're happy to do it, but somebody has to fund it because we have a budget we have to live within. Right now, we have a little bit of relief because of the COVID relief funding, but that's going to end, and that's going to end soon. And we have to continue to work well together. We will continue to do that because each one of us have one interest in mind, and that is our riders. And so we continue to work well to put better service out there for our riders, but we need more funding to continue to do a better job for them and to see the vision that we all see. I will tell you, I grew up in Europe. There were trains and buses all the time. And what Nora said earlier, which is absolutely true, it's a frequency issue. The reason we don't connect is we don't have enough frequent service. You can plan, and many times I get the question, why don't I connect to the Metro train? And the answer is Metro might not be the major transit generator. The major transit generator may be a hospital down the street. So we're really scheduled to go to that hospital, and we just happen to be going by the train station. If we have frequency, we can just continue on the road. Another bus will be there in 10 minutes, so the passenger won't care. So we need the funding to get the frequency to make this a world-class operation that we all expect it to be.
No, absolutely. The frequency, I mean, just with Metro, the Southwest line, it's more convenient being in Orland, but I use the Rock Island because of the frequency. You know, it makes sense, but, you know, hopefully, you know, we can get off the governance and get to the funding issue.
Yes.
Thank you.
One other point on efficiencies, and I want to thank all of you. Chicago has done a better job than virtually any city in America preserving our federal funds so that we could make these 50-year decisions in a non-election year environment and have time to do the kind of planning that these folks have done. Our peers, many of them are out of the federal monies. We've preserved ours thanks to their incredible work so that we can make decisions based upon data and reflection and not do it we're in a political world or environment, but not do it in an election year in Illinois. But the biggest thing was to have the time to plan like these professionals have done. And so I thank you for preserving your federal money. We wanted to make sure the feds didn't claw it back. But they have all done a better job than almost all the peers nationally in preserving the federal money so we can make these decisions in a rational, timely basis. So, Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this quick, and this is for all three agencies. I know when you identified the cuts in your respective agencies, which are pretty draconian and necessary, was there a theme? Did you look at what gives me the most bang for the buck, or how do I get the most impact in terms of efficiency of dollars? I'm just curious as to, with each agency, in order to come up with the cuts that you made, what was the the underlying basis, or what was the philosophy that you employed?
I'd say for CTA, given the nature of this exercise, we very much wanted it to hit clearly as to how severe these cuts would be across the region. So I think you heard me say we didn't identify yet at this point for various reasons geographically where those specific places would hit, because we wanted people to understand the scale of the impact. And that's really been the point of this exercise in particular. I think it's, if we ever had to take steps further in this regard, you'd start to see a deeper analysis of where we would have to do those cuts specifically.
So, Nora, what I'm trying to get at specifically, we didn't take a Doge-like approach and just start hacking. We actually looked at the individual components and then kind of came up with the numbers. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
Yes, for Metro, we looked at how we could continue to maintain service equitably across the system, but also looking at our agency and seeing where we could possibly make those cuts. Where are there areas within the organization we could live without if we didn't fund? Where are there vacancies that we could continue to operate and provide the service if we didn't? This was a hard conversation to even pull this exercise together. I'd say it was kind of the nudging or the forcing of the RTA to get us here. Good job on them doing that. It is an exercise that we needed to do, but this is not something we wanted to do. We prefer to keep our efforts on the things we would do if we had sustainable funding. But yes, we are looking across the board, and if we have to go down this pathway, there will be the necessary steps of the Title VI analysis that we'd have to do before we even start to identify where we would be taking or reducing that service within our system, because we want to be equitable and fair when we do this.
And I would just say ditto to both CTA and Metro. I would add that these are devastating cuts for us. We looked at the least devastating cuts that we could do. Again, for PACE, some areas we have very infrequent service. And so we're trying to spread where the pain, spread the pain is the only way I can say it, so that, not any one area gets hit. But we also have to look at the fact we have some areas where you can't take someone to work one day and say, we'll pick you up the next day. We had to make some sense out of this. And we also will have to do a Title VI analysis. We'll have to go out to public hearings. If we come to this point, I'm hoping we won't, it will be devastating for our riders, and it will have, we'll have public hearings where people will not be happy, rightfully so. And we'll then have to take that information back, put that in all of our modeling efforts, and do our Title VI analysis and determine the final outcome.
Director Ryan.
Thank you. Mine is more of a comment versus a question, but I think that we can all safely say that everything that we're doing here is very much under scrutiny. We've got media here today. We have a room full of people. And so I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that when articles come out in the Tribune and the Sun-Times that criticize our ridership amongst us as leadership and how we're spending money, what contracts we're doing, that doesn't look great, right? We need everyone's support on this. We need the public behind us. So that median group of income earners who may be able to take it, may be able to take an Uber, probably can drive, we need their support on this. And so I think everyone here at this table needs to take a deep look inside as to, am I riding the public transit systems that I'm here advocating for? And if we're not, there needs to be a major change. I don't know why we're doing this if we're not riding our own systems.
And Nora, just to add, Director Ryan, I should say, just to add to that, and I know there might be a few other questions or comments, but that's a perfect segue into the wrap-up comments that Malik is going to make in terms of why people should care about this, even if you never get on a bus or a train, why this is important to our region, our economy, to the jobs base for employers as well as employees.
Malik, wrap us up here, my friend.
No worries. Chairman and directors, as you have just heard from the service board leaders, we've been working on this for the past couple of months, and I'll start by saying, as folks who have done transit planning and urban planning as like our education, and we never go into it believing that our primary job will be to cut things. It's to add services to bring to people. So this has been a really difficult effort for the planners at CTA Metro and PACE that they've had to do this at this time. So we really hope that all of this, to your point, Director Ryan, leads us into a funding solution and public supporting us. So I'll quickly wrap up by sort of summarizing regionally what you just heard today. As you see here, the system-wide cuts will be devastating. I can't repeat what everyone has said here, but I'll mention that the regional number of transit positions impacted would be 3,000 to the question you asked earlier, Director Mondero, and the huge impact on ADA service, which is a lifeline for folks. But beyond that, we haven't seen eliminations like this in our history in a very long time. Next slide, please. We have tried to, as Nora here mentioned, it's very hard to depict this level of an impact. You can play the animation that we have tried to show what happens here across our 6-county region if these service cuts were implemented. At the bottom layer, you see the red line showing either complete eliminations of routes, then the different colors as you go up the layer showing a combination of either weekend or other elimination and frequency reduction. So again, really hard to visualize, but we are trying to show how this will completely create a transit system, diminished system that does not fit our region. Next slide, please. A cut of this magnitude severely limits the remaining transportation system of our region to carry the capacity that transit will no longer be able to carry. For example, to replace the transit service, the cut in auto capacity to downtown Chicago would require 26 new additional highway lane miles. And as I said previously, we don't have room to add 1 or 2, and it's probably not a good idea to add highway lanes anyway from climate and other perspectives. At current vehicle occupancy levels, the region would need new parking in downtown Chicago at the level of building 12 Sears towers. Again, that's something that we would use that capacity to build housing or space for commercial and not for parking. That's how important the transit system is and how people would be impacted even if they currently do not take it. As many as 100,000 people would be forced to purchasing a car if they could even afford it. As CTA mentioned, many of the riders do not have that kind of income to do that, and we support their ability to get to jobs and other activities. This would be a cost to the public of $1.1 billion in their need to buy vehicles and find other modes of transportation. 460,000 additional metric tons of carbon dioxide will be added to the air as transit becomes significantly diminished. Next slide, please. Conversely, as you heard, Vision is coming together for $1.5 billion in new investment if we were able to secure it. As we talked about service hours, getting us closer to a vision where the wait times in each type of service are significantly reduced for riders and allow for transfers between our agency more efficiently so that we have these regional riders who are able to take transit. Additionally, rider-focused efficiencies such as centralizing customer service, coordinated fare structures, and even a regional transit ambassador pilot can further enhance rider experience. Next slide, please. We measured regional job access for both scenarios across the 6 counties and found that an average resident of south side of Chicago will lose access to 14% jobs on transit in the fiscal cliff scenario. In contrast, the same resident could have access to 76% more jobs using transit if we were able to expand our system. Similarly, a diminished transit network will get McHenry County residents to 22% fewer jobs, versus the expanded network will increase their job access by 24%. This is a regional issue. To conclude, we face 2 very different futures for transit and the larger economy for our region. Falling off of the cliff will kick off a chain reaction hurting the economy, with job and wage losses making Chicago and the suburbs less competitive, as you see on the left. The perception of savings from not funding transit will show up as new expenses in other parts of our lives. On the contrary, if a $1.5 billion investment is made in transit, we will recoup that and more, as Chairman, you always emphasize, with significant gains in GDP, jobs, and income returned into the economy. So that concludes our presentation, and happy to take any additional questions that you may have.
Thank you, Malik. Anybody have any last comments? Dr. Sagar?
Mike, first, thank you very much for the reference to McHenry County. I appreciate that. As an international economic developmental economist, you know, my focus has always been throughout my career on economic growth and development and quality of life enhancement. That's the focus. And I think, frankly, that's the focus of all leaders in government as well as members of this board. We look to economic growth and development, and we look to enhancement of quality of life. And so I am concerned, and I would like to suggest that on slide 50, where you identify system-wide cuts will harm all riders and residents, we have to understand the perspective that economic growth and development, enhancement and quality of life is a cyclical nature. We always hope to get better, right? We're looking for something in the future. While it's not quite as quantifiable as some of the other things that you have listed here under the harm that could be seen, was kind of touched on by Janice, and I appreciate that. But the momentum of progress toward economic growth and development and quality of life enhancement will stop cold. It will absolutely stop cold. And I think we need to emphasize that here, maybe as a kind of final statement, if you will. And the time which is going to take to recover that momentum is going to be huge, huge. I mean, 5 years is very short. Just think of how long it has taken us to begin to recover from COVID. But this cold stop is going to have a huge economic impact and quality of life impact. And so I think we need to state that. It's very important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Sagar. Let me just say, this is now about a transit fiscal cliff. This is a regional emergency that involves the loss of $2.6 billion in GDP to northeastern Illinois every year. So this isn't a transit fiscal cliff issue. This is a regional emergency.
And if I may, Director Sagar and Chairman Dillard, just to echo what's been said, you know, I think we talk a lot about crime and security on CTA and transit for very important reasons. And we talk about the actual incidents that occur on that system and the reaction and the coverage. But funding transit is an act of crime prevention. And that doesn't get spoken about enough. If you really want to turn the dial and improve people's lives, you run transit into their neighborhoods and you run it frequently and you give them the opportunity and access they deserve. So I appreciate you raising that larger point in terms of quality of life. I actually am meeting next week with an economist at the University of Chicago who has a book coming out regarding, it's called Unforgiving Spaces, because I'd like to talk to him about talking about transit in terms of its impact on some of our most entrenched societal problems like gun violence. It often is forgotten as a component there. We talk a lot about investment in neighborhoods and infrastructure, and you can literally change a neighborhood overnight by running a bus line through it. And so we need to think about it more broadly in the impact of our society and our region that way. So thank you.
Director Ross.
Mr. Chairman, I used to work for a man who said that perceptions unchecked become reality. And I'm really concerned about that in terms of Melinda's answer to the discussions in Springfield. I think we're totally misguided to believe that our crisis can be solved by simply changing the governance. Everything that we've heard here today in terms of finance, I think points to the fact that we don't have a governance structure problem, we have a financial structural problem. And so I would encourage all of us to keep that in the forefront as we talk to our own legislators about how we are going to get out of this situation that we find ourselves in. Reforms are critical, and I don't think there's anyone at the table that is opposed to instituting reforms that will improve this system. But I am concerned that with any new governance model, there's a certain amount of throwing out the baby with the bathwater there. And as an old guy like me likes to say, don't fix it, if it ain't broke. And the system has some flaws. It needs to be improved. But to think that in the middle of a financial crisis, we would throw everything out the window to create a new system, I personally believe is a serious mistake.
Well said, Professor, President.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Director Lewis.
Thank you. In addition to what Director Ross said, I think I would encourage us to think broadly and boldly. I mean, this problem didn't occur overnight and won't be fixed overnight without a strong leadership, support, as well as not stopping at just, in effect, kicking it down the road. So we should look at all aspects, and I commend staff, I commend the service boards for really being very open. But I think we at the board level and at the customer level have to also be involved in the solution, because the problem won't be fixed by just a Band-Aid. It's going to take some major and very honest and probably painful, as Melinda said, solutions to this problem in order to make sure we're not back at the table 5 years from now talking about the same thing. So it's not just a money problem. It's not just a governance problem. It's a holistic problem that really has to be solved if we're going to have a successful transportation system in Northeast Illinois to sustain us in the year 2025 and beyond. So I guess my point is, I want to encourage us to be bold enough to think broadly and not just stop at the first solution that pops up on the line, to use a transportation analogy. We really should, dig deeper, make sure we've got a long-term solution, one that will sustain us beyond the foreseeable future, and keep transit successfully being the engine that supports this region as it has been in the past. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Director, very much. Anything else other than moving on to our actual action item agenda? Thank you all very much. You are great professionals. Go back, thank your staff. And I guess just finally, having once been a chief of staff for a governor during a recession where I had to ask cabinet officials to go through the same sort of exercise as you, I know how difficult it is, and I cannot thank you enough for laying it out for us. I know it took some prodding probably from Leanne and the staff here at the RTA, but your vision is bold and it is deeply appreciated. And I know firsthand how hard it is to sit there and go, wow, what would we do in a doomsday scenario? So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All right. Item 7A, our approval of letters of understanding with Indiana and Wisconsin, an amendment to the 2025-2026 capital program and extensions to ICE-funded projects. John, you gonna lead us off here?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. I'm Jonathan Sung, a senior analyst, and I'm here today with my colleague, Tara O'Malley, principal analyst. We're both from the Capital Programming Department, and we're here to request your vote on the following 3 ordinances: extensions to the ICE-funded projects, authorizations of letters of understanding with Indiana and Wisconsin for federal formula allocations, and an amendment of the 2025-29 capital program. But before we dive in, I wanted to share an informational update with you all about the capital evaluation metrics. Next slide, please. Oh, we're good right there. As a reminder, there are 15 metrics based on 12 themes that have been used to analyze all of the projects in our 2025-29 program. The capital evaluation metrics were adopted as part of Transit is the Answer. We update the evaluations of the programs with each capital amendment. and then we share the updated information on RTAMs within a few days of amendment execution. Today, we'll have a closer look at one of these metrics to demonstrate how the capital program is addressing this regional priority. Next slide, please. Today's featured metric is capacity, benefit, and need. This is a measurement on a project's impact on capacity and the need for additional capacity. Let's talk about a few key examples in this measure. First, it applies to vehicles, stations and stops, transit lines, operating rights of way, and storage facilities. We're also analyzing to see if additional capacity is currently or expected to be needed in the coming 10-year planning horizon. Now let's take a look at how the 2025 to 29 program shapes up. 53% of funding provides increases to capacity where the system is at or near capacity. 2% increases capacity for operations or facilities that are not near capacity. And we have 26% returns the system to original capacity. This leaves 19% of funding that's unrelated to capacity. Now let's get into the specific projects that move the needle on this metric. Next slide, please. Our first group of projects can be categorized as increasing capacity of transit operations or facilities where current or planned utilization is near or at capacity. So 53% of funding was scored as increasing capacity where utilization is at or near capacity. The following are some noteworthy projects by service board. For CTA, the project to highlight is the 103rd Street Bus Garage. The garage is already near full capacity, and with electrification, more buses will be needed, thus requiring additional storage space. Metra's new bi-level rail cars is another project to highlight, as peak hour trains are already at capacity. These larger cars can allow for more passengers on the trains. Finally, Pace's River Division project expands and improves the existing bus garage space. Pace's leasing space to accommodate their bus and paratransit fleet in the western suburbs. The larger bus garage will reduce Pace's need to lease the storage spaces. In addition, it will allow them to house more buses, which allow for more electrification. Next slide, please. Our next group of projects are those that increase capacity of transit operations or facilities where current or planned utilization is not near capacity. Only 2% of projects involve expanding capacity in this manner. RTA and the service boards look closely at this measurement based on the constrained budget environment. Projects fall into this category are generally state of good repair improvements where it makes economic sense to add capacity as part of a larger renovation rather than adding capacity as a separate project in the future. Examples of these types of projects include Metra's Rogers Park Station and their Olympia Field Station. Both of these stations will undergo major rehabs, which will increase capacity via platforms and entrances. Next slide, please. Finally, let's take a look at the projects that maintain and/or returns the system to original capacity. As you can see on the slide, there are many projects around the system that are focused on state of good repair. Often, these include rehabilitation of rail cars, buses and bridges, or purchasing replacement rolling stock. By undertaking these projects, regional assets are better able to perform at their originally intended capacity. Next slide, please. Now, the remaining slides focus on the items that you will be voting on today. Let's take a look at our first ordinance, ICE extension projects. This quarter, Metra is requesting extensions for two projects, the GPS train tracker and the downtown terminal information displays. CTA is also requesting extensions for two projects. This would be the venture improvements and the safety management systems. No requested extensions from PACE this quarter. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Tara O'Malley. Next slide, please.
Thanks, John. I'm Tara O'Malley, as he stated. Our second request is to approve the partial allocation of federal funds between RTA and Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, or NERPC, and between RTA and Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, or SORPEC. for the federal fiscal year, or for part of the federal fiscal year of 2025. The splits are based on an agreement reached in 2022 and follow the same formulas, but with 2020 census data used, which was used for the first time last year, and with updated National Transportation Database data. Both NERC and SORPEC have received and accepted the proposed splits for the funds made available under the continuing resolution that provides funds through March 14th, 2025, which is approximately 5.5 months worth of funding. We expect to bring the final apportionments, the full apportionments, to you in May. Next slide, please. Our final ordinance is an amendment to the 2025-2029 capital program. The proposed project and funding changes are for all three service boards, CTA, Metro, and PACE. Collectively, the program is increasing by $184 million. CTA's program is increasing by $23 million, comprised of reprogrammed Rebuild Illinois bond funds to active projects in order to close funding gaps. Metro's program is increasing by $124 million, comprised of both new and reprogrammed funds. New funding accounts for $71 million, and the remaining $53 million is consisted of reprogrammed Rebuild Illinois bond, PAYGO, and RTA ICE funds. PACE's program is increasing by $36 million, and it's all new funding. Next slide, please. We wanted to highlight the competitive grant funding that the service boards are adding this quarter. That's thanks to both Metro and PACE. They're both adding discretionary grant funding from federal, state, and local sources, totaling $98 million, and represents about 53% of this amendment. Metro is adding a total of $71 million in new grant funding to the following projects: Van Buren Street Station, Rogers Park Station, Smart Gates, battery and electric hybrid vehicles, Woodstock Yard. And PACE received $27 million from Illinois EPA and are matching those funds with $9 million of service board funds. Next slide, please. To conclude, staff requests adoption of the following three ordinances: extension to the ICE funded projects, letters of understanding with Indiana and Wisconsin, and the approval of the amendment to the 2025 to 2029 capital program. We're happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we're seeking your approval for these ordinances.
Any questions on any of those three items? If not, how about a motion and a second? We approve the items in 7A. Director Groven moves, we approve, seconded by Director Yonan. And with that, Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Aye.
Director Gorman?
Aye.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Katarg?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Mondero?
Yes.
Dr. Pang?
Yes.
Dr. Rotundo?
Yes.
Dr. Ross?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Dr. Sager?
Yes.
Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
16 ayes.
Thank you. 7A items in there are approved. Item 7B is an ordinance authorizing a contract for legislative consultant services. Rob Nash, our Government Affairs Director, is moseying on up to the table, and Leanne or Rob can answer questions here. Rob, you want to say anything about this?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We are proposing an ordinance to authorize the Executive Director to execute a firm fixed fee contract for a 3-year base term with Smith Garson, who provides advocacy services and consulting services at the federal level, both in Congress, but also importantly with the federal agencies that govern most of the funding for the system. I'll just note as a point of context, we're obviously going through a period of great transition in Washington, and the amount of uncertainty that we're dealing with is, I don't think, declining. And so we are looking to maintain sort of a foot forward, on our toes stance with what's going on in DC, and Smith Garson has been very effective for us over a number of years. One point I will just frame up, we have upwards of a $35 billion unmet capital need for the state of good repair for this system. The federal government will be considering reauthorization of the surface transportation bill in the next year. Those conversations are already happening. So there's a lot going on at the federal level. Obviously, we have a lot going on at the state level. And we think this is an important contract for us to, secure. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think the federal government obviously is the main source of capital funding for the entire system. And it's obviously an area that we need to spend a lot of time advocating for the system, and we are prepared to do that. So I'm happy to answer any questions and talk through any other details on the proposed contract.
Thank you.
I have questions.
Director Colson.
It's always hard to quantify the value of lobbying services. I would like some assurances. I don't know much about Smith Garson, but as to what they're actually going to be able to do for us and how they're going to do it. Lobbying success in the past does not necessarily guarantee much going forward, especially when there's been a change of parties in Washington. And I survived 2 such changes of the Justice Department, and there's always dramatic changes in personnel. There's always dramatic changes in policy priorities. Relationships in DC have changed a lot. Has this firm had to reinvent itself a little bit in Washington? I know there's hiring going on there, and
Yeah,
are they ready for this transition?
I think so, yes, I do. Having been a lobbyist in the private sector previously, I always operated with a saying, which is, you can be relationship informed, but you cannot be relationship dependent. Relationships work until the moment they don't, and then you're in big trouble. And so you have to have a process to approach. And thankfully, a lot of the funding that we deal with is based on formulas, and there is a process that you can manage. But relationships, yes, important. And I will note that Smith Garson is, I think, unique in one aspect that the vast majority of their clients are agencies like the RTA. They're either municipalities or transportation agencies, other units of government. And I think it's both speaks highly of their focus in Washington, but also ensures they have a deep understanding of the types of issues that we confront at the federal level. And so, yes, they have been deeply ingrained in both the transition for the Trump administration and the changeover in majorities in Congress.
And who are they going to lobby for us? Are they going to lobby the White House, the Department of Transportation, the Congress, or all of those?
All of the above. So obviously, I've mentioned FTA and the Department of Transportation, controls a lot of our fate when it comes to the funding side of things. But reauthorization is not something that, can be ignored. It is pending. The conversations about the parameters for that discussion are occurring as we speak right now. And then there's other issues that, we had not anticipated until the changeover in administration. So, for example, some in Congress are suggesting elimination of the pre-tax commuter benefit as a way to pay for tax cuts through the reconciliation process. We just had a conversation with Smith Garson's assistants with Representative LaHood's office as the member on Ways and Means. Those are the types of conversations that you can't necessarily anticipate, but you need to sort of seize the moment when we have to get engaged. And that's the type of assistance that we rely on them for.
And I'll just add, it's not just making those connections and those relationships, it's doing the groundwork and analysis that helps support us. Obviously, sometimes it's, Rob or myself speaking to some of these members of Congress or even senior leadership out of different departments at the federal level. And while, we've got an amazing team here, they have an ear to the ground on kind of what the key issues are, what analysis needs to be done in advance to prepare us for that. Additionally, I'll add that in terms of our federal agenda, they don't just help us coordinate our federal agenda here locally, and the chairman can speak to that because of our joint meetings and even the feedback we've gotten from members of Congress on how that coordination works in a positive way. They also help us with our peers around the country who are very much, and there was literally just a meeting yesterday where we're collectively talking, and Smith Garson actually helped us kind of facilitate and coordinate in that conversation between us and our peers. So the SEPTAs, the WMATAs, the MTAs. So as we're not just looking to regionally coordinate what our agenda is, but we are looking at it nationally with our like peers. So we're having even a stronger voice and a stronger message as we go forward.
And how will this firm interact with the lobbyists for Metra and Pace in Washington so that we speak with one voice?
Yeah. So on an annual basis, the RTA develops a joint set of priorities on the capital side, and when reauthorization or other major items like that occur. And so there's the coordination at the staff level, but obviously the coordination in DC in terms of conversations. So for example, you know, if there's a project that affects one of the service boards, and we're going to see one of the you know, Senator Durbin or Senator Duckworth, who are, you know, sort of have that statewide perspective, Smith Garson helps facilitate not just the conversation, but also the coordination with the other service board assets that they have in DC.
And I noticed they do represent SEPTA, they represent a lot of airports. Is there some mechanism to identify and get around potential conflicts of interest? I mean, if it's a zero-sum game, we may be competing with SEPTA for some money. How do they handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all firms, you know, whether it's a law firm or a lobbying firm, have sort of those standards in place to manage potential conflicts of interest. And I'll just note that we have not experienced, you know, any of that type of situation in the recent past.
And I think we would benefit from periodic reporting from them as to what's
And
going on.
I think as the board knows that we report and willing and open to doing even more, but we report to you monthly. On a monthly basis, you get a summary report sent to you in advance of every board meeting as well. We will look to continue to provide that and more. And as we just alluded to, currently in the process right now of updating what our federal agenda also is right now with the service boards and with our national peers. So we will be speaking sort of our perspective, but will be consistent across not just our region, but across our peers in the country. So updating both our federal agenda, also with the specificity around what our focus will be for the next federal reauthorization as a specific example, because that comes up every 4 years, 5 years. And so keep working on those things, and we'll be happy to share with you that as we refine that and finalize it.
Just one comment, and I know Director Koterick wants to speak on this. Smith Garson, you know, I've seen a lot of lobby firms in my day. They are incredibly professional. They're transit or transportation oriented. When we go to Washington, they are the coordinator of Metra and PACE and the CTA. So Smith Garson is the umbrella. In Washington, and there is great change, and that's why we need them probably more than ever. But it is the entrenched staff and the entrenched bureaucracy at USDOT that they work so well. And many of these people are lifers. They don't change with the presidency. And Smith Garson's knowledge of just the federal rules and regulations are amazing. You know, they've helped us, all three service agencies get, you know, tremendous millions of dollars. And I agree with you, Bill. It's hard to quantify what their value is. And then I'd say last but not least, yes, they have other clients, but hey, big law firms have multiple corporations or multiple insurance companies that they represent. Jim Smith is from Illinois. He's an Illinois native, so I know where his heart is. And then when you go into any member of Congress's office, the respect for this firm when you're there, and I sort of know the body language of many of these members of Congress, is, you know, it's highly, highly respectful of this firm. And it probably helps us that they have, you know, not only transportation knowledge, but they're in there seeing these members maybe on behalf of other clients because they built up so much respect with the members of Congress. But, you know, their role is massive. And Washington is just a complex place, and they've helped us navigate this very, very well over the years.
Chairman.
Yes, Director Ross.
I'd just like to point out that they also represent Will County. I was talking to the county executive chief of staff last night, and he was pleased to think that we were going to be working with him again. They're happy with the services.
Tom, Director Koterick.
Thank you, Chairman. And I have an amendment that I'll offer, but first to speak to it and introduce it. And it's really piggybacking off of Director Colson's comments and some things that Director Ryan said today about creating a unified position and really having a united front. Things are much better, and credit to Rob and Leanne and Chairman, your leadership. I've been subject to a different less unified approach in Washington, and that is exactly what we need and where we're going to. I think the amendment really adds emphasis and a statement from the board about how important that is to do, which I think is critical because of the things that Director Ryan had pointed out today. The scrutiny on spending of everything we're doing is particularly in a microscope. And lobbying in particular for the RTA and the service boards has not the best old history. I dusted off our old bylaws and saw that the only thing that has a notwithstanding clause in it is contracts for lobbying and legislative services. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary, items related to contracts for legislative consulting services or lobbying shall originate with the board. I think that was from some bad experiences in the past. And I think we need to lean in. You know, the importance of Washington now and the fluid situation, to put it mildly, is really, really, really critical. We're seeing huge impacts in New York with congestion pricing, Washington, D.C., Union Station, WMATA, high-speed rail in California. Having a real-time presence in Washington is probably more important than ever, but I think it's also important for us to have a unified federal agenda and have it publicly available, and then for the RTA staff and the service boards to work together so that that agenda is reported to us quarterly, which are just the two things that this amendment does. And I'll end before I offer the motion to something that Director Ross said an old boss had once told him about perception. An old boss of mine in the United States Senate once said that if it's not in the legislative text, it's as good as a Post-it note on a Bible. So that's why I'm really insisting that and encouraging and asking for each of you to support this being in the ordinance. I think it's critically important, and it's something that I think we can come back to the public and say, you know what, we're adding to make sure that we're doing this together, to coexist, like Director Gorman said. I think it's important to show that here and show that today by us. Thank you. And I'd like to make a motion to offer the amendment.
Sure, thank you. All right, so.
Chairman, can Director Katarik read through his full motion?
Go ahead, Tim.
Sure, this just adds 3 and 4 to the existing ordinance. And so be it further ordained by the Board of Directors of the RTA that 3, the Executive Director is hereby directed to work collaboratively with the service boards to develop a unified federal legislative agenda that reflects the shared priorities and funding needs of the region's transit system. This unified agenda shall be available to the public via the authority's website. 4, the Executive Director is further directed to work with the consultant and service boards to provide quarterly reports to the RTA Board on the status of the unified federal agenda. These reports shall include updates on advocacy efforts, progress on priority items, and any federal actions that may impact the region's transit funding and policy priorities.
And can I just jump in before we go too much
Yeah,
further?
please. I
Just-
mean, you do that anyway, even without the ordinance, but that's okay. I get the
Correct.
reason why we need maybe the ordinance, but
Yeah, it's more of a procedural thing here. I just want to make sure that we do this right. So even though Director Katarik just went through that, we've got a motion on the floor in a second, which is appropriate, but we also need a vote, a formal vote from the board to even consider the amendment first before you actually vote on the amendment. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so we need that vote
so how about
first.
the same two directors, Koterik and?
I'll make a motion
and
to consider the
Olson.
amendment.
There you go.
Do you want to do a roll call? No, we're doing one at a time. This is for you to consider the motion, then you can have conversation about it, and then we can vote on the amendment.
It's all good.
Discussion on the amendment.
Right.
Well, we gotta do this vote first.
Just,
Okay.
just
Could
to,
do last unanimous roll call if you wanted.
yeah, but do last, any objection to that? If there's leave, leave is granted and.
And now you
yes,
can
now we
discuss
can-
the motion.
Now we can discuss
The amendment to the motion, the amendment to the motion.
Director Carey.
I tend to, maybe what you said a minute ago, Chair, kind of got lost in the discussion, but you don't know that we need this. And I don't, when I first read it, and Tom and I have talked at length about it, I don't know that we need it because we already do it. Having said that, I mean, they have worked, and I'm sure they could go in more length about what they focused on the federal level, but they have worked with the service boards, and they've done this ongoing for some time. No, there is not an agenda that's published on the website. You can find the state legislative agenda, but there isn't a federal one, and so we should do that. And I don't disagree with that. So while I don't think it's absolutely necessary to do this, in the light of what Director Ryan and Dr. Kotarek said about, rather the level of scrutiny that's on us today and everything we do and every penny we spend. So if this helps to cross, the Ts and dot the Is, that's great. Having said that, I would offer one change, though. I mean, in your second point, you talk about quarterly reports, and we currently receive monthly reports that include the federal update. So I don't know if you want to change that.
Sure, I'd appreciate that. The monthly reports we get are not public, and these would assume that the
It's on the
quarterly
web-
would be public.
You can, well, no, the report is not public, right? The agenda is. Okay. Okay. So that's what you want to, but a monthly report or?
I think quarterly would be fine. It can aggregate it.
To make it monthly rather than quarterly, what do I need to?
Well, I thought I heard we were sticking with quarterly, but
Quarterly.
quarterly.
Okay, so
It's fine.
gotcha. Okay.
And so if, you can have more discussion about it, but then I think the next motion would be to approve the ordinance with the amendment.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Just discussion on the ordinance. Yes,
Just
Director
let me,
Carey.
just to finish, I don't know that it says to post it. In your first part, Tom, you say to post it on the website, but is the assumption that the quarterly report would also be public?
Yeah, Director Carey, it's assumed we could put publicly after the word provide if we wanted to emphasize that. But again, back to the practice portion of this and the good collaboration that's been happening to date. I'm happy to leave it as is. And if that isn't public, I'm sure we can make it public
Okay,
as the meetings come about.
all right, thank you.
Dr. Mayor Sager.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank Director Kotarek. I think this is a good addition. I understand additional language can sometimes compound misunderstanding as we look at documents of this nature. But I believe in this case, and certainly with the scrutiny that we are under in this time, I think there is nothing wrong with statements, amendments that reiterates our commitment to a strongly unified federal legislative agenda and routinely reporting a progress through open and frequent communication. I think that is essential to what we are doing today. And so I do support this amendment. I think it's most appropriate.
And
Thank you.
a strengthened RTA theme too, which is good. Director Yonan.
Thank you, Chairman. And, thank you, Director Kotarek. Just to be able to have the conversation, Director Carey, just thank you again for your points, Dr. Sager as well, Director Sager. I think it's important to just be able to kind of have this conversation in light of what, was unfortunately in the media just a few weeks ago, where the feeling that perhaps some of our service boards are kind of doing their own thing, and to be able just to reiterate the importance of the RTA's leadership in this and then the board supporting that. So if anything, I think that's kind of the good that's coming out of this, is just for us to reiterate the importance that these service boards are going to be out there. Their needs are different, and communicating them has always been, work that I know, Executive Director Red and you have, always demonstrated the importance of how that all is unique, but yet comes together under your leadership. So I think just the value of this being some, good conversation on this end really has accomplished his goal. And again, thank you, Director Kotarek, for bringing this together. And I'm going to also vote aye. Thanks.
Amen. Any other discussion on this? So we have a motion to do pass, I guess, as amended. And with that, Madam Secretary, take the roll.
Okay. Yeah, I need a motion and a second.
We actually need that motion
and a second.
and a second.
So let's use the same duo here of Director Kotarek and Director Colson to approve 7B with as amended. So it's sort of what I call do pass as amended from my old legislative days. So there's a motion and a second on all of the procedures by Kotarek and Colson. And with that, Joey, take a roll call.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson? Aye. Director Colson? Aye. Director Gathing,
Aye.
Director Gorman. Aye. Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Jenkins,
Aye.
Director Katark,
Aye.
Director Lewis.
Yes.
Director Mondero,
Yes.
Director Pang,
Yes.
Director Rotundo.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Yes.
Director Ryan,
Yes.
Director Sauger,
Yes.
Director Yonan,
Aye.
and Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
16 ayes.
And that is so approved as amended. Thank you very much. And Director Koterick, thank you. And Director Colson, thank you very much. Items 7C and through 7H are the approval of contract and expenditure items as they appear on the board agenda. 7C is an ordinance authorizing a contract for transit signage on all maintenance and storage services. 7D is an ordinance authorizing a contract amendment for audiovisual equipment and services. And 7E, I guess, is the approval of the travel expenses is in our packet. Malik is here if you have questions on 7C, the ordinance on transit signage, and Jerry is here from Bali on 7D, which is our creative services one as well. Any questions on any of those 3 items? Do you have a question?
Yeah.
No. Okay. If not, how about a motion? Director Sager moves that we approve 7C through,
All this is before us.
7E.
yep, trying to see what, it's 7C through 7E, not
Yes,
H,
sorry,
right?
that's
Yeah,
correct.
it's 7C through 7E. So Director Sager's move we approve, seconded by Director Mondero. Madam Secretary, take the roll, please.
Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson, Director Gathing,
Aye.
Director Gorman. Aye. Director Groven,
Aye.
Director Jenkins,
Aye.
Director Katark,
Aye.
Director Lewis, Director Mondero,
Yes.
Director Pang,
Yes.
Director Rotundo,
Present.
Director Ross,
Yes.
Director Ryan,
Yes.
Director Sauger.
Yes.
Director Yonan,
Aye.
Chairman Dillard.
Aye.
We have 15 ayes.
I
and
just
one
want to
present.
thank Director Jenkins and Director Pang for hanging on so long. We all sometimes have these, where we have to not physically be there and be on Zoom or be on whatever Teams meetings. So I appreciate Natasha and Sarah, you hanging on so long.
It's very good.
So
It
I
is.
know what it's like, but thank you two very much. And I thank the dedication of this board every day. You're all amazing and you all bring so much expertise and knowledge to the table, and it is greatly appreciated. And I wish I could bottle it up along with the 3 women that sat at that table this morning and take it and sprinkle fairy dust all over the legislature with it.
That's right.
So, I guess item 8 is new business. Any new business to come before the board? Yes.
Just a really brief one,
Director
Chairman.
Mondero.
We've had a couple brief conversations about use of committees for the board, and I just wanted to see what would be the next steps of potentially utilizing committees so that we could gather the most effectiveness of this board.
Sure. I want to talk to staff, director, but if you all, any of you all have, and some of you probably predate where we used to have committee meetings, there were committees at 8 o'clock in the morning before the 9 o'clock board meeting. Most members attended the 2 committees. It usually was 2 committees. It was that would meet, sometimes 3. But let me know if you would, what you think about going back to to committees. The only upside of doing this 8 o'clock exercise as opposed to 9 is it generally sometimes shortens the board meeting because much of the discussion, especially if we're all sort of hanging around, if you're not in the committee, they still sat around and listened. It may shorten the length of the board meetings, but I'd love to know what you all think of committees. So just let me know before our next meeting, and Dennis and I will kind of coordinate with Leanne and figure out where we're going. And I think you had a suggestion too, that we may even want to, depending upon what the legislature does, with whatever the governance structure will be. If it's us that's in charge, probably having a group that kind of watches the changes that have been mandated, to us, and how they're going, and just to make sure we implement, whatever the new changes are. So let's do this, if it's okay with you. Let me know what you think of committees. You like them, you don't like them. They kind of went away during COVID because we weren't physically here all the time. And we've really just absorbed what the committees did into the main agenda of this group. I have no problems with committees. And it would probably require you all to be here, an hour earlier than normal. My goal as the chair is to, if there's been committees, and most of us has heard it, to not take as long sometimes during presentations. That's the upside, let's put it that way, of having, there's many upsides to having committees, but that's an upside to having to come down an hour earlier. So anyway, we'll come back next month, but Director, thank you very much for bringing it up. And John and I had, Director Motondo and I talked, he said, I want to get more involved in human services and other things with his expertise. Perhaps that's a great way to, use your expertise over and above, not taking the time at the regular meeting on personnel things and the other objects you have, a great interest and expertise in. So we'll come back next month and figure out what we're going to do, Dennis. But thank you very much. But just let me know what you all think of committees. Either call me, email me, let me know, okay? Over the next 3 weeks, I guess. So that was new business. Any other new business become before the board? If not, our next meeting is post tax day. It's April 17th of 2025 at 9 a.m. And how about a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn by Director Lewis, seconded by Director Gorman. All those in favor signify by leaving. We are adjourned. Thank you.